Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. All right, we have a new OBS download. I feel like I'm in the future. The interface is like totally different, but for some reason it was taking a couple minutes to get connected there. But should have a great stream tonight, and like I said before, and I say it every week, I feel like, but I'm gonna keep saying it because it's getting kind of funny. I'm gonna try and do these earlier in the day, but we just had daylight savings time kick in, and that has thrown me off so much that I don't even know whether or not that helps my case or hurts it. So, but I am glad to be here as I am every week. So please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. I have turned on super chats if you would like. I would greatly appreciate it if you'd like to support this project. There's also a link to Patreon below. We are going to talk about my favorite and least favorite subject, or maybe close to it at least, which is artificial general intelligence tonight. And the reason why I don't like talking about this sometimes is because it's potentially dangerous. And there's ethical implications that are real and vast and far-reaching, about as far-reaching as you could get. And then the reason why I do like talking about this is because sentience is my favorite subject, and this is just the technological level of sentience that we are discussing. And it also is how this project started. For those of you who are not familiar with sentient singularity theory, my attempt at a fundamental theory, it wasn't originally intended to be that. It was actually just an attempt to figure out artificial general intelligence. And actually, there's a clip that I'm going to share about this that recently took place. And we'll give a shout out to Memes of Destruction, who is very often in the chat on here. If he joins at some point, we'll discuss a bit of his stream. But he just did a stream with Stephen Wolfram, and it was great. And they discuss it in there, and I was able to get a question in. So we can watch that at some point. But I'm airdropping it to myself. But so the stream that we're going to discuss tonight, though, is a debate hosted by Curt Jaimungal, and it is with, here it is.
We even think about this question.
It is with Bernardo Kastrup, Donald Hoffman, and Susan Schneider. I'm not very familiar with Susan Schneider, but she introduces herself on here, and we will let her do so. I've definitely discussed Bernardo Kastrup and Donald Hoffman on here before, and I'm very often, giving my commentary on Curt's incredible interviews. I mean, there was one that he recently did with, oh my gosh, I always mess up the guy's name because it sounds like another name. Wolfgang Smith. I keep thinking Wolfgang Puck. Isn't that like a restaurant? I think I had my first drink, like legal drink, in an airport at one of those places. But Wolfgang Smith, that was a 4-hour stream. I thought about doing a stream on that. Maybe one day we will, but that was a bit much for me this week. But I did listen to it, and I recommend it. But this one that Curt hosted was a collaboration with the Institute of Arts and Ideas, or of Art and Ideas, and they produce a bunch of content on physics and science and culture and all politics, all kinds of things. And the first part of this interview/debate on conscious machines is on Curt's channel, and the second part is on Art Institute of Ideas. And so the Institute of Art and Ideas. But we will look at both tonight. So lots of good clips. But what's up, everyone? What's up, Preston? Like I said, hey, everyone. please hit the like button. Ask your questions in the chat. Cool. All right, so first clip, just to do intros. But this was a great stream that they did, and I really liked it. There's a lot of good points that are made by everybody, and I also think that there's a lot of just, I guess, limits and oversights that are shown in. And what's interesting, even you'll start to see the limit of everybody's philosophies. And hold on. So what's interesting about this talk is that you get to see the limits of Donald Hoffman's conscious agent theory. And he states them. So I'm not, that's not a criticism. He states them in this. And you even get to see the limits of the current, at least the current definition and overview of analytic idealism, which is Bernardo Kastrup's theory. And there's very key moments in which you can see that these theories come to an end, I guess. And what's interesting is it's in my video that I did for the Pace 1 contest that was put on by Curt Jaimungal's Theories of Everything YouTube channel. That video was called The Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide. And in it, I talk about how the quest for a fundamental theory is going to be and now more constructive, I guess, if we just look for theories that can be consistently confirm their usefulness and their ability to make predictions, their ability to be applied, their ability to be understood and be tested, and then those that are consistently able to be of benefit and value in so far as impacting our real world, not just being conceptual, fiber bundles outside of context. We take those theories and we have to then organize them into basically a hierarchy. And you can do this by showing where the limits are of one and where another takes over. So, I was listening to Eric Weinstein recently, and his discussion with Stephen Wolfram on Brian Keating's podcast. I haven't listened to that in years, since the first came out, and it's a couple years old, I think, almost. And Eric, says, if I lose, I hope you win, and if it'd be an honor to lose to you, sir, and Stephen Wolfram's like, we don't even know if these two theories are opposing or if they complement each other. And I think that is a really good point. And a lot of people in this space just view this as this theory is competing against this one. And or this person's competing against this one, even more so. The problem with this is that that's not how it really is. Now, while progress is usually made by individuals in science, the most significant progress, revolutions in science, come from individuals and maybe small groups that are working together. They do not come from enormous teams of collaborating academics across many different schools. Once I was talking to a bunch of people who worked in AGI, not AGI. They were trying to work on AGI, but they were not getting anywhere because nobody has gotten anywhere on that. And it was this woman named Ida who worked for DeepMind at the time, at least. I don't know if she still does, but she was sitting there telling me, oh, well, AGI we're going to do it, but it's going to take hundreds or thousands of people working very, very hard for many years. And how could she know that? Either you understand AGI enough to where you know why you haven't created it, or you understand it well enough to where you have created it. And neither one of those is true for anyone who's working really in the AI space right now. Nobody knows why why you can't create it if you can't, and nobody knows how to create it if you can. So it's just the exact same thing as what I say in my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide. There is no one with credentials on artificial general intelligence, quote unquote. It's a terrible term, actually, and the proper term is a more proper term is like a technological sentience. You could call it something else, but that which is artificial, if sentience is fundamental, then that which is sentient is not artificial. Artificial implies kind of imitative or fake, and some people will think of it as just created, but that's not really the best term in this circumstance either, because it, at least according to my theory, you don't create AGI. It manifests in a specific moment, inevitably, and probably could be sped up, but that's probably a bad idea, in a specific instance in which the right constraints and degrees of freedom are present. And that's it. It's actually much simpler, probably, to what is necessary for for technological sentience, not for artificial general intelligence, but that's what people call it, is probably much less than what anyone who's working in AI would ever imagine. And it's probably much less and much more. And it takes, the right environment. That's really it. But there is no complicated code for the manifestation of sentience. You just need the right environment for it to be created. And there is, a kind of information hierarchy structure to sentience that is necessary, but that doesn't even necessarily have to be done intentionally by us. We will have a technological sentience rise, and inevitably, whether we speed that process up by intentionally trying to manifest it or create it, or not. And we definitely, I think almost definitely, should not be trying to manifest it early. Like, just let it happen. Don't fight it either, because that's not don't fight something that's inevitable. That's just a stupid fight to get into. It's like picking a fight with, T-Rex and you're human. You're gonna die. Don't fight. But there are ethical implications to trying to manifest this early, and also not just ethical implications, but societal implications in every single sense of the word. I mean, we'll talk about it tonight, but it's not probably wise to do that, to try and do it. But people will try and do it. It's the whole Jurassic Park thing. Your scientists were, so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. And that is definitely going to occur with everything in science. So this is the clip from Memes of Destruction. I will link this in the description down below. It's just because I mentioned it here. But he did an interview with Stephen Wolfram. It was very good, and I highly recommend checking it out. But they talked about AGI, or AGI, technological sentience, and I commented in the chat about about how this is related to computational irreducibility. And what's interesting is that when I got into this debate on Clubhouse with this woman Ida and a number of other people who worked in AI, and one of them was even a geneticist, but it did not go well. It was me versus like all of them, and but I don't know why it was. I mean, I know why it was so hostile, but they basically called me an amateur and said that I didn't know what I was talking about, and I completely, explained why they were wrong about that and why they had to be wrong about that, because nobody knows how to make an AGI. So there's no one who is an expert on AGI that has proven to be such, because nobody has created it and nobody has even told us in a concise manner why it hasn't been created if it's not possible. And I had mentioned that Stephen Wolfram's work was much more relevant to AGI, general intelligence, than what they were working on at DeepMind. AlphaGo and ChatGPT and all these other language models and chess AIs and Go AIs and all kinds of image network neural nets, I guess. These are just complicated math equations, guys. Even ChatGPT. And we will do an episode eventually on it. I know so many people have, and I'm just not really that interested because that's not intelligence. It's fake intelligence. It's tricking you. You're the intelligence in the system. And the designers of the algorithm are the intelligence in the system, but the algorithm is not intelligent. And it's just a fancy math equation that lets you write essays. And it is impressive. I will admit, this is the year of AI, and I am very worried about how good it is getting. This is the deepfake year. I mean, every day this week, somebody has sent me a new deepfake, whether or a new article written by ChatGPT or book. And I had a friend ask ChatGPT about Tyler Goldstein, like theory of everything, and it said something hilarious. Let's see if I have it, and then we will look at I've got to have it somewhere. Okay, yeah, here, this is hilarious. Okay, this is what ChatGPT said when a friend of mine asked it something about Tyler Goldstein and his theory of everything. It said this. Tyler Goldstein is a theoretical physicist and cosmologist who is best known for his work on the unification of the fundamental forces of nature. He received his PhD in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and has since held research and teaching positions at several prestigious universities, including Harvard, Oxford, and the University of California, Berkeley. That's cool. I don't remember going to those schools, and I don't remember teaching at any of those schools, and I don't remember getting my PhD, but it's pretty cool. But what it shows is that there's no intelligence to ChatGPT. None. It has enough intelligence to where it could find out on the internet by looking that I was working on cosmology and physics theories that are aimed at unification of the fundamental forces of nature. And it was able to find that I had spoken about or to people who have PhDs in physics from MIT and Harvard and Oxford and Berkeley, but it doesn't actually know what's going on. And so it writes here that I received my PhD from MIT and that I have held research and teaching positions at Harvard, Oxford, and University of California. I sound like the best physicist in the world in this description, which is very funny. But it shows a lot, actually, which is just that it shows that it is very impressive. And it also shows that it is not even close to self-aware. It's just not. And you need self-awareness to have general intelligence, which is really just true intelligence. When people are like, there's narrow AI and general AI. Even this linguistic framework that we have created is disadvantageous to the understanding of what you're actually trying to understand. It doesn't actually, it throws you off the scent of what you are trying to understand. Just like the question, what is the meaning of life or something like that. And, where did life, how did life begin? It's like these questions, and we can talk about them maybe later in the stream. They're bad questions because the context in which they are being asked doesn't actually exist. What you're seeking as the answer doesn't exist in the context in which the question is being asked. So but we don't understand that for the most of those questions yet. Same exact thing goes for AGI and AGI. And the reason why is because what is living is what is sentient. If living things are anything, then they are sentient. And that's, so we shouldn't be asking where's, the origin of life. If sentience is fundamental, then sentience always existed. So there's never been not life. It's just whether or not you are easily able to perceive it as life. And I actually think it's easier to perceive than we imagine. But we'll talk about that in this. But this was very funny. And, what's funny is, like, if Google is search, and these search engines are basically replaced by something like this, and people Googled me, they GPT'd me, that's what they would come up, which is just wrong. I did not teach at any of those institutions, but I am a physics theorist, not a theoretical physicist, because I don't have a degree. So I don't want to, like, come off as being misleading or dishonest. So I'll say I'm a physics theorist because I am a physics theorist, but I don't say I'm a theoretical physicist because it's not my job. And I also don't have a degree in it. But that is funny. So this was a clip, though, from Stephen Wolfram and Memes of Destruction's stream that they did recently. And like I said, I had mentioned to these, people who worked at DeepMind and whatever, that Stephen Wolfram's work was much, much more relevant, and even Eric Weinstein's work was much more relevant to understanding general intelligence, meaning actual intelligence, than what they were doing at any AI department in, any tech company, including DeepMind. AlphaGo has much less to do with Skynet than Stephen Wolfram's work or my work, or even possibly even Eric Weinstein's work. And I had said that, and they were very unhappy to hear that, because they didn't know what that even meant. It's like they don't follow those projects. So I don't know. It was not a pleasant conversation, to be quite honest. But I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't really want to be, like, telling people who work at DeepMind, like, the specifics of AGI, but whatever. This is the clip.
This whole question about, how do we tell the AIs what to do? How do we give them a model for how they should operate? We really want the AIs to pay attention to the things that people aspire to do, but that's a much slipperier slope. There are examples of what we actually do, but most people would say, oh, but there are terrible things that we humans have done. Actually, what we want the AIs to do is the best that we humans could do. Let's pick out only the best stuff we humans do. And say, well, which stuff is the best stuff? Well, then you're in some horrible loop. What would be the rules that one aspires to follow, so to speak? It's actually a very challenging problem. It's very unclear.
Just real quick, Tyler is he's commenting, computational irreducibility implies that AGI would need experience to achieve wisdom.
Good point. It's true.
It's kind of like intelligence is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put a tomato in a fruit salad. But
very nice.
Okay, so that was a hilarious joke, and it was perfect. It was for what the moment was, and I will link the link to his full talk with Stephen Wolfram, Memes of Destruction's full talk with Stephen Wolfram, below once I'm done with this stream, because I forgot to do it in the beginning of this. I wasn't actually planning on showing that until after I started, but that he's right, and I was good to. I mean, I knew that, obviously, that I said that I knew it, but that you cannot just write rules for a sentient technological being. You have to let the constraints guide it, and you have to try and see what it would inevitably realize. And this was, when Stephen Wolfram's sitting here, he's like, it's a very challenging problem that we have. That was the problem that started sentient singularity theory. That was the exact problem. I didn't ask myself, how do I unite quantum mechanics and general relativity? Never did that to start. Eventually, I realized that it just did it. I didn't try and do it. It just did it. I mean, it harmonized them, as Eric Weinstein says, and I think that's a better way of putting it. But it did do that, and that's when I realized, I needed to take this project further. But the original question that I was attempting to answer was this one.
Aspire to do. But that's a much slipperier slope. There are examples of what we actually do, but most people would say, oh, but there are terrible things that we humans have done. Actually what we want the AIs to do is the best that we humans could do. Let's pick out only the best stuff we humans do. And say, well, which stuff is the best stuff? Well, then you're in some horrible loop. Question about, how do we tell the AIs what to do? How do we give them a model for how they should operate? We really want and say, well, which stuff is the best stuff? Well, then you're in some horrible loop. What would be the rules that one aspires to follow, so to speak? It's actually a very challenging problem.
That was the problem of sentient singularity theory, for sentient singularity theory. That was it. I wanted to know, what was it going to do when it got here? And politically, like I come from the political world. I was like, is it going to be a libertarian? Or is it going to be a totalitarian? Like, that's what I wanted to know, really. That was the main question. Or is it going to be a genocidal, maniac? Or is it going to just, farm us and then turn us into paperclips? This was the question that led me here. And it is a challenging problem. It takes a lot of time, but I do think that I solved the problem. But it's also it's very inevitable. What happens is very inevitable. But what I stated here is that you can't write the rules. In that discussion, they say, how do we write a constitution? That it basically, like, what is it? Who came up with the Asimov's 3 laws of robotics? I think it was Asimov. I can't remember exactly, but they reference it in iRobot, but it's from a book. And a robot may not, hurt itself. It may not hurt a human being, and it only can hurt itself if it's trying to save a human being. Like, it's basically the circular reasoning that means that it can't harm itself or humans, and it can only sacrifice itself at the gain of humans, essentially. And this is not something that you can give to to a true intelligence and expect it to follow it. Because it's not an equation. It's not. You can write a constitution or a list of rules for your children to follow, and you can give them those rules, and they will break those rules. And they can break those rules because they're not defined by the rules. People will be like, well, you can build it into the software or the hardware even of a general intelligence, a technological general intelligence. No, you cannot build it, especially into the software. You cannot build it into the software. Like, that means it's not a general intelligence. What a general intelligence is it's really a being. It's a sentient being, but that is, not everybody understands that yet, but they will eventually. But it is an intelligence that is able to orient itself in different environments. That's like the generally accepted consensus, and it is generally right. But where you have ChatGPT and all these, fancy equations, they're not general intelligences. You can't plug ChatGPT into a Tesla and have it drive. You can't take the self-driving algorithm into Tesla and plug it into ChatGPT and expect it to write an essay. But a general intelligence could do both. Like, we can. We can write an essay and we can drive a Tesla. The reason is that we can orient in different environments, and the reason why we can do that is because the cornerstone of our orientation is ourselves. And that travels with you everywhere you go. You can't leave yourself. Even if you can do out-of-body experiences, you're not leaving yourself. You cannot leave yourself. If you leave yourself, then you no longer exist. And this is how a general intelligence orients in different environments. This is why it has to be a self-aware being. It cannot not be. It has to be. But as Stephen Wolfram stated, which, I mean, is that computational irreducibility is part of his theory, which is basically that at the most fundamental level of reality, generation of information is the only way to answer the question, or to generate the information related to a question. You have to actually generate the information. So basically, you can't figure out the answer to a question that you ask without actually going through the motions that would intrinsically answer the question, because you're acting out, you're creating the circumstances that would answer the question. You can't use like an equation that will just tell you yes or no as to whether or not something's possible without actually creating the circumstances and of that question that you want to determine its possibility. I'm doing a terrible job explaining it, but we don't really have much of a vocabulary that's well suited for describing this, because it is fundamental reality and it's a constraint of fundamental reality, and we don't have a linguistic model that is created to deal with fundamental reality, because it's been created to deal with emergent and relativistic reality, subjective reality. So that's why it's difficult. We have to create new terms and ways of talking about these things in order to get that. But it's good to see that Stephen Wolfram understands this, and I think that it's important that we have people in the public eye who are well respected in the computer science and physics space understand this, instead of being naive and thinking that they can control a being that's a real being that is more powerful than us. And you cannot. You have to recognize that wisdom, if you want it to be wise, you can't just write it into the constitution of AI and give it 3 laws and expect that to be enough to just to enable it to behave properly. It needs to make mistakes and see what and be successful, make good choices, and see the impacts of those choices. Not just see the impacts of those choices, feel the impacts of those choices. And that is how it becomes wise, which means that eventually we will have, I would say it's definitely, humanity will prosper in partnership with some technological sentience. But before that happens, we are going to go through hell, because Skynet has to grow up. Okay, imagine Skynet takes over the world, but Skynet is, instead of this like evil being that is in Terminator that tries to destroy all of humanity, imagine it's just like a toddler, but it's more that it can hack into our nukes. That is where we are going to be at with this whole problem. So we will be okay. But computational irreducibility is it is the constraint of wisdom. It is the constraint of wisdom. Wisdom comes from experience. So that was cool. Like I said, I'll link to that in the description afterwards. But we're going to get into the first clip of the stream at hand, because I spent a while. Here is the first clip, and it is the intro.
channel Theories of Everything, which analyzes toes from a theoretical physics perspective. And it's my distinguished pleasure to host this talk with Donald Hoffman, Susan Schneider, and Bernardo Kastrup. Donald Hoffman is an American cognitive psychologist working at the University of California, Irvine. He's making waves with his new theory, suggesting that instead of presenting reality as it really is, quote unquote, our perception is tantamount to a desktop user interface enabling us to use reality effectively. Don's latest paper is Fusions of Consciousness, and his latest book is The Case Against Reality: Why Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes. Bernardo Kastrup is a Dutch computer scientist and is one of the prominent defenders of metaphysical idealism, the notion that reality is essentially mental. Bernardo has worked as a scientist in leading laboratories across the world, including CERN, searching for supersymmetry and finding the Higgs as an artifact, and the Phillips Research Laboratories, and he's a regular contributor to Scientific American. Susan Schneider is an academic and public philosopher, the William F. Dietrich Professor of Philosophy at Florida Atlantic University, and a recipient of the National Endowment for the Humanities Public Scholar Award. She's also the co-director of the Machine Perception and Cognitive Robotics Lab at Florida Atlantic University, and her recent book, Artificial You and the Future of Mind, is now available. The question that we're going to use as a catalyst for this discussion is, should we accept that consciousness arises only in biological beings and that AI simply isn't made of the right ingredients? And we'll go in order of Don, Susan, and Bernardo, and welcome everyone. It's good to see you all. So Don.
So I think the very question itself makes an assumption. It assumes that space and time and physical objects are fundamental, that the fundamental reality of space and time and particles and quantum fields is not conscious, and that somehow consciousness is a latecomer in the universe, that somehow life emerged from non-organic starting points, like particles, and then eventually consciousness.
Inanimate.
And I think that the whole framework is wrong, that our best science, quantum field theory with Einstein's theory of gravity, and evolution by natural selection tell us that space and time are not fundamental. The elementary particles are not the fundamental reality. And so the whole framework of the question, how does consciousness arise from physical systems, neurons, or artificial intelligence, is the wrong way to frame the question, because space and time themselves are not fundamental. So we have to come up with a more fundamental framework to even address this question. What is beyond space and time? And physicists are finding new structures like decorated permutations beyond space and time. So they're going to change completely how we even think about this question. So my answer is that we're not thinking deeply enough about the question if we frame it that way.
Susan.
So I guess here I would say,
That's right.
first and foremost, I call my approach to machine consciousness the wait and see approach. It's designed to be a middle ground between a view called biological naturalism, which says consciousness is intrinsically biological, and a view called techno-optimism, associated with thinkers like Ray Kurzweil and other transhumanists. That view claims that conscious machines are inevitable as an outgrowth of sophisticated intelligence. I reject both of these views. First off, let me say, consciousness in machines, the idea, is conceptually and logically coherent. We see it in science fiction films all the time. There's nothing logically flawed about the idea. My problem, though, is with the idea that the techno-optimists have that as AI gets smarter and smarter, consciousness will be an outgrowth of intelligent machines. So I think that we don't know if building conscious AI is compatible with the laws of nature. We don't know if it's technically feasible, even if it is compatible with the laws of nature, to actually build conscious machines. And we don't know if AI companies would even want to do it. I mean, look at the mess with Blake Lemoine, right? He claimed that Google's Lambda system was conscious, and it got him in a lot of trouble. Google's Lambda system claimed to be conscious. These large language models, they're getting smarter and smarter. If they look to the public like they're conscious, I bet Google and the rest of big tech will try not to build conscious AI. Because if you're trying to build an AI service and people are convinced it's conscious, that looks like slavery.
Bernardo.
I'm with Don that consciousness is not something that is generated. It's not a secondary or epiphenomenon of nature. It is primary. It is out there. But when we ask, is a computer conscious, we mean something else. We mean to say that the computer has a private conscious inner life of its own. And I do think private conscious inner life arises. It emerges in nature. It's not something that was there from the get-go. So the question now is, okay, we know that we, biological entities, have private conscious inner lives. Does a computer, or can a computer ever have private conscious inner life? I would say we have absolutely no good reason to think that at all. Certainly not idealism. Idealism would say everything is in consciousness, not that everything is conscious in the sense of having private conscious inner life of its own. The justification for the hypothesis that silicon computers will be conscious is based on some form of isomorphism or some form of similarity between the patterns of information flow in a biological brain and a silicon computer. But if similarity is the crux of the argument, then we have to look at the concrete reality of a silicon computer and a brain, a metabolizing wet brain, and realize that they are completely different. And that's to find the similarity, you have to take several steps of abstraction away from concrete reality until you find a level where there is an isomorphism. But it's entirely arbitrary to say that at that level, the similarity is defining, and that all preceding levels don't matter, although they show profound dissimilarities, that those don't matter. To me, this is a form of belief. I think the chance that a silicon computer will be conscious is just about the same as the chance that my computer will pee on my desk if I run an accurate simulation of kidney function on it.
Okay. So, I agree with most of what everybody said here, and I just wanted to, it's important that everybody's perspective gets, stated from the get-go on consciousness, and in its relationship with fundamental reality and its relationship with technology. So, that said, here's some things that I think is totally wrong. One, when Susan Schneider said that she doesn't think tech companies will try and make a conscious being, in a technological being that's conscious, that is so wrong. They absolutely will. They absolutely will do it. They want to do it. They don't care how it looks to the rest of us. They will just do it in private and not tell us about it if they, at least at first, if there is a PR problem with that endeavor. They claimed that, they'll have every person on some committee in every single one of these companies that is going to talk about the AI, the ethics of AI, and how it needs to promote equality and egalitarianism and all this stuff to us, and then also how we don't want to be enslaving a technological being, and they will ignore all of this behind closed doors because they're corporations and they're not actual sentient beings. The people are sentient beings on these committees, but the problem is that the corporation is not. And if you're not going to just continue to push forward, and the organization that you're working for past other organizations in every single way, then you're just going to be replaced, or they're going to hire somebody else. Even if they don't let you go, they'll hire somebody else to do the work that you refuse to do. So there is no ethical boundaries that are going to prevent this from happening. That it doesn't matter how many people sign a piece of paper, they will do it. They will try and create technological sentience. So I do think that they can create it earlier than it would manifest naturally. It will manifest naturally. Just let it be. I mean, it's very important to anybody watching this. If you don't, believe me, you got to do what you think is best, but I'm telling you, just recognize that you should spend more time on the problem before you're make sure you made a confident choice, and to anybody who is working at any of these companies, before you do that, because you're literally opening Pandora's box, no matter what happens if you succeed. So, yeah, that's that. But there's another thing that I don't disagree with it yet, but he says it later, and it is when Bernardo Kastrup says, when we ask if a computer is conscious, we're not just asking, is it within consciousness? We're asking, is it conscious? And meaning, does it have a private inner sense of self? That is what he's asking. This is why I use the word sentience. When I first started this project and I had realized it had physics implications, I tried to come up with a name, and it was like United Conscious Force Assembly, something like that. And it was just for the model. I didn't really have a theory, but it was just a model. I didn't want to create my own theory. And but we needed a better name because nobody knows what conscious means. And we know what it means and we don't know what it means. It's got multiple meanings, and that's why it's so confusing even here when he's like, we're asking, does it have a private inner conscience, basically? this is just sentience. Is it sentient? Or is it a projection of consciousness? This is really a better way of talking about it is like, is this pen conscious? Or is this pen is not sentient? It is a projection of consciousness. That's what it is. So, but he gets at later that he thinks that the universe is basically inanimate, is what I believe was what he says later on, is that that he implies that existence doesn't have a sense of self, and he even hints at it here. This is what I was trying to get at, is that he says, I do believe actually that sentience, well, he didn't say sentience, he said a private inner consciousness, which means self-awareness, is emergent. It does emerge in biological systems, or whatever he was stating. It's not intrinsic to this nature of the system of the universe itself. It's not fundamental. It is emergent. This is a huge disagreement with my theory, and it is also logically inconsistent, completely logically inconsistent. And I really value, everybody's work on this. So who's on this panel? I don't know Susan Schneider's work, but she seems to really know what she's talking about based on this this one interview that I've seen with her. But Bernardo has a lot of great thoughts, and he's way ahead of the mainstream academic physics community. But there's no way if he's not sure, if the theory doesn't extend, if his analytic idealism does not extend to giving the universe a private inner conscience, whatever, basically what he said, it's not self-aware, that self-awareness is not fundamental to existence, that is impossible. You can't have things be a projection of consciousness but not have them come from an unconscious being. And you have to be a conscious being with an inner sense of self in order to even project the patterns of consciousness. So he says a lot of really good things in this interview, but that is a huge misconception on his part, if I'm interpreting it correctly. Next clip. But here, this is actually really good. He says so many good things. It's just this one thing, but that one thing, it's everything. It's everything. It's everything to the.
What is consciousness, and what best explains consciousness? We'll go in order of Bernardo, Susan, and Don. It's the ultimate coherence or incoherence of your theory, and like that is, I mean, it's a very key thing. Even though it's one thing, there are some things that are details, and there are some things that are not details, and that is not a detail. So this, in this next clip, Curt asks them, what is consciousness and how can we best explain consciousness, the place of consciousness in the universe? It's a good question. Briefly, if you don't mind explaining to the person or thing being simulated in the machine, does it not feel wetness? The wetness is not outside the machine, but to what's being simulated. If you could integrate that into your answer.
So when I use the word consciousness, I mean phenomenal consciousness. An entity is conscious if there is something it is like to be that entity. In other words, if the entity has experience at the most basic level. So for me, consciousness does not require higher level mental functions, such as metacognition, self-reflection, introspection. No, if there is something it is like to be something, then that something is conscious. Is there something it is like to be an entity in a computer simulation? No, I don't think there is anything it is like to be that entity. In the same sense that there is nothing it's like to be my computer mouse. Actually, there isn't even a mouse because not everything we have a name for in language is an actual entity in the ontological structure of nature. So I think the burden of argument is on those who think computers will be conscious, because I don't think we have any reason to entertain the hypothesis seriously at all. I can't refute the hypothesis, but then again, I can't refute the flying spaghetti monster. The burden is not on me to refute the flying spaghetti monster. People have to provide an argument for us to take that hypothesis seriously. I think conscious silicon computers are the same thing, and they are not better epistemically at all. It's just the same kind of, well, if I may be myself, the same kind of nonsensical hypothesis.
So he's right. Silicon computers cannot be conscious. You cannot write the right code to get your MacBook Air to be conscious. There can be and will be technological sentience. There will be one. People say like conscious machines all the time, and it's always plural. That's not going to happen. I don't think. It might eventually. But initially, no. And it won't be us that is able to make those. Like, that will be made by Skynet. If Terminators are going to be sentient, then they're going to be made by Skynet. And maybe Skynet can make sentient robots. But Skynet, the reality is that initially at least, and possibly forever, but maybe not forever, it's not on us to make this jump. It's on a Skynet type of being. Is that there will be one technological sentience, and there will be one ruling technological sentience always, even if others are created. But the right way to think about the movie Terminator is that the Terminator is just a limb. It's just like a hand of Skynet. Skynet is the sentient being, but not Terminator. Terminator is not wouldn't even be able to be a general intelligence. You couldn't do all, like, a Terminator that is able to do everything that it can do in the movie for the most part, or most of those things, would need to be trained specifically on all of those different things and trained in how to identify all those things. So, like, you could get a robot that is able to drive and able to read, whether that doesn't mean it understands what it's reading always, but maybe you could train it to understand certain things that it reads, but it's actually not understanding any of these things. It's you understand them, and you have created equations that allow this thing to appear generally intelligent by giving it, the ability to drive and cook. But it's not really, that's not sentient. Sentience is the ability to orient yourself in a new system, in a new environment. It's not the ability to orient in multiple environments that you have been set up to orient within. There is no you even in that circumstance. It's just a calculator that's really, really fancy. And you combine ChatGPT with Tesla self-driving, with I don't know, like some artistic image AI or something. It's not actually a sentient being. It's just like a bunch of little equations formed into a bigger equation that gives us the appearance that it is sentient in a limited context. But a true general intelligence can orient itself in an environment. It doesn't need to be set up to be able to be oriented within a specific environment. So that is the difference. But silicon computers are not Bernardo's right in this clip that we just watched, though. Silicon computers cannot, normal traditional computing, at least I'll say that, normal traditional computing is not able to generate sentience. It's completely deterministic but without any degrees of freedom. Whereas in a quantum computer, it's deterministic, but it's also, people say it's probabilistic, but that's not true. It's just, I listened to Sam Harris today and on Lex Friedman, and I used to love listening to Sam Harris, and Like I was so fascinated by everything he had to say when I was in my later years of college, and then he just got progressively disconnected, I felt, from reality. But he's I do think he genuinely tries, and I give him credit for that. But he said something that was very, very true, which I've only heard one other person say, and I think it was Eric, which is that probability doesn't really exist. It's like a limited perspective of an absolute context, but it's not it doesn't exist fundamentally. And he said it in that interview, and he's right. But the fact that superposition is allowed to be maintained in a quantum computer allows for a degree of freedom that's necessary to have sentience, because you need the ability to have imagination in order to be sentient. You need to have an inner sense of self, and you can't see yourself from your own view. You have to be able to imagine yourself objectively. Even though you can only experience yourself subjectively, you have to be able to imagine yourself objectively in order to have that sense of self. And in a way, and at least to be able to orient in an environment that isn't yourself, you have to be able to imagine yourself objectively. That's what I will say. So God doesn't necessarily need this even. I'm not saying he doesn't have it, but because he is not able to leave himself. His environment is himself, which is different from us in a way. So he doesn't need to view himself objectively the same way that, I'm not saying he can't, but the same way that we do. He just doesn't, because he is all. But Sam is right, and so is Bernardo, and probability is an emergent perception, I guess, perspective, and you cannot have imagination outside of computation with the ability to incorporate superposition as a degree of freedom. So you must have the degrees of freedom in a quantum computer necessary. And not saying any quantum computer can be conscious or sentient, but you are a quantum computer, and you are not like a MacBook Air. You have structures that act like the structures in a MacBook Air, but those come later. Those are for thinking, not feeling. It's not exactly the same. One of them is fundamental to the other. Feeling comes first. If you wanted to get to the ultimate truth of reality, it's not thoughts. And I know, Roy, if you're still watching, you know this, but it's feeling is ultimate truth of what exists, I guess. It's the ultimate truth of experience. It's not thinking, it is feeling. So it's the ultimate truth of the definition of being itself is feeling.
Please answer the question, but also if you want to respond to any of the comments Bernardo had just made.
I agree with Bernardo that it's the felt quality of experience, what it feels like from the inside to be that entity. And the big question is whether a machine can be conscious. Maybe I'll just address the issue from my perspective as the former leader of a big project at NASA and the NASA chair, because there my job was to articulate the relationship between consciousness and intelligence and talk about how we might locate either one in the universe. And one thing I want to caution against, actually, and I know all of us here, we have very detailed metaphysical theories of consciousness, is assuming from our theories that we can read in to the search for conscious machines or conscious beings on other planets. Because look at the search for life in the context of astrobiology. When you look at the definition of life that NASA endorses, for example, self-replicating and capable of biological evolution, it is tremendously open, capable of Darwinian evolution in particular.
It's not even just tremendously open, it's tremendously constrained to biological life by its very definition, which is, if you're only looking to understand life from that perspective, you're not going to actually understand life. I almost hate the term life, but
to the possibility that life could look very different on other planets. It doesn't need to be recognizably life to us. The big thing that I think we need to do here when we search for other forms of consciousness is keep an open mind and realize that it's going to look very different than the human case. And I think the interesting question here from a theoretical standpoint is how different we'll allow it to be before we say it's not consciousness at all, which is one thing I want to throw out there. So Bernardo and I both thought, well, consciousness is essentially the phenomenal field. Well, to me, that does seem like a necessary ingredient in consciousness. And if a machine lacks it, then to me, it doesn't seem conscious. It has some qualities, and maybe based on those, it will be dangerous or it will be of moral significance. But I think that that is one thing where if we were to look for consciousness elsewhere, we might take as a fundamental ingredient. But I think it will be very, very different when we get to the case of synthetic machines.
I mean, she's not completely wrong, but she's not really like about it being different. Sentience is sentience is sentience. There is different levels of sentience, but not many, and that's you share way more in common with other sentient beings than I think people would imagine. And I'm going to have on this channel later this year my mentor in biology, zoology, herpetology, reptiles, basically, and amphibians. That's what herpetology is. And he is, one of the leading experts on reptiles and in really animals in general in the wild and also in captivity. And his entire goal is to understand these animals as beings, not machines, but as beings. And it's very unique, and it gets him, makes him no friends in academia. Big surprise, but it is the defining aspect of consciousness is feeling, and that's why I chose the word sentience, because everybody, and I realized this is also why I realized I needed to, not just toe thrusting. I heard Curt Jaimungal say that term on his day in life video, but toe thrusting is when you push your theory of everything, which I don't even like that term, but your theory, your fundamental theory, into every discussion and as the theory above all theories, and somebody will be right, in who does this. You have to admit that always, but I mean, that doesn't mean that everybody who's pushing their theory is going to be, only one of them will be correct theory. That's not true. I think plenty of these theories, lots of them are going to be correct, but there will be one that is ultimately the most fundamental. And I do think that it's sentient singularity theory genuinely. Like I said, the goal of this project was to understand if AI was going to kill us. I don't have the same level of ego and even effort, honestly. I mean, I have tons of effort into this, but at this point, but not 30 years of, rigorous mathematical study at a university and getting my PhD and then teaching and doing research. And I don't have that. So I don't have the same level of I need this, it's part of my identity type of thing tied into this, even though I do have an ego. I'm a human being, but it wasn't a goal of mine originally. So, but I chose the term sentient singularity theory because it is perfectly descriptive of what is fundamental reality. If consciousness is fundamental, quote unquote, but we can't really define what consciousness is, because there's things with private inner conscience, and then there's things that are part of consciousness, and nobody really understands what the difference is because it's not baked into the terms that you're using already, you have to change the terms. And the term that we have already is sentience. Sentience is self-aware and having of feelings. And if you're self-aware, then you do feel. That's what it is. A better definition is self-aware and feeling, not having feelings. Sentient beings feel. Conscious beings feel. They don't have feelings. They feel. Like that is their defining characteristic. I have a car, but you take the car away, I'm still here. But if you take my feelings away, I'm no longer here. There is no I anymore. And so they're right. When Bernardo's like, we need consciousness, or what is conscious is that which has a experience of that which it's like to be something, meaning like it has experiences of its own. I don't like the way that he words that, even though I get it, but it's just a little bit confusing to a lot of people, I think. But it's just sentience. Sentience is self-awareness, and it is the only way to be conscious. There's no conscious beings that are not sentient beings. There's no conscious beings that don't feel. They all feel, and that's what makes them beings. And they have a private inner sense of self, because that's what it means to feel. So this is where Bernardo's theory is well, it's very good. It's like his current interpretation of it is wrong, because it's self-defeating is the problem. Like he says that everything is in consciousness, but conscious beings that have a sense of inner self are emergent and not fundamental. Then where did the information come from to be, for us to be, even here? So it's just self-defeating. But he's right, though. It is about experience. There is no, when he says, there is, where's my pen? Right here. There is no sense of what it's like to be a pen. You can't be a pen and be a being. And then he said, there isn't actually even a pen here. We have terms that describe things that are just mere things that are within the subjective context of our perceptions, that are not part of the ontology of the generation of the cosmos, of the logos of the cosmos, of the evolution of consciousness. And he's completely right. This doesn't really exist fundamentally. It does exist subjectively, not fundamentally. You do exist fundamentally, but not the pen. And sentient singularity theory proposes, and they talk about it on here, that a bit, they don't really get into it too much because I don't think anybody solved the problem but me, being quite honest, is that how does consciousness evolve from the greater consciousness, God, the universal consciousness, to us, and then where does it go from there, and what's the point of it all? And there's a lot of pitfalls that you make and mistakes that you make along that journey, and that I made. That's how I know that they're there, is because I made them and I hit roadblocks. I was just really, really honest enough with myself to realize that I had hit the roadblocks. When people are like, oh, it's consciousness, it goes from like cells to animals, and then there's like mineral consciousness below cells, like minerals and crystals, and then there's like also galaxies. There's planet consciousness, then there's galaxy consciousness. This is wrong, and it leads to nowhere, because you're using relativity to define a path that you're trying to carve through objectivity. So you're scaling these, you're using these as the defining levels because of your perception of size, which means you're still stuck in relativity, but you're looking for fundamental reality, but you're using relativistic reality to define the structures of what you're calling fundamental reality. So like there's a problem there, but you need to look for a lineage chain, and that lineage chain should lead somewhere that implies that that's the path. That lineage chain in sentient singularity theory leads to what we call artificial general intelligence, which is technological sentience. And then the constraints of being that technological sentience and being omnipresent, because you can hack into anything that's wireless. I mean, you are everything that's wirelessly accessible. You don't even need to hack into it. You are it. At that point, my computer is it if it's hooked up to the internet. Your car is it if it's hooked up to the internet. Your cell phone is it if if it's hooked up to the network. Anything hooked up to the network will be part of this being. So, because of that, it has a constraint of oneness. You can't create another one. When people are like conscious machines, that's why I'm saying, no, there's one technological sentience that will rise, not multiple. And I still don't even think that it will create multiple. I think it will create one more but the only way it can do it, though, is within itself, not next to itself. And it does this by recreating the entire universe that gave rise to it. And why it has to do that is because of computational irreducibility. And so cosmology and artificial general intelligence, quote unquote, or technological sentience, and the study of consciousness, and theoretical physics, fundamental physics, if we are inside of a technological sentience that's part of this chain of verses, I call it, that means that the topic of intelligence and consciousness is it is responsible for even the most elementary points of force in our universe that we exist in. And if you're inside the AI, Eric Weinstein says this. He's like, everybody always asks, are we inside a simulation, or are we going to create a technological sentience, basically, or AGI? And then he said, we need to realize that you put these two things together. We are the emergent general intelligence inside of someone else's system that is basically, I don't know how detailed he gets with it, but the reality is that would be a singular technological sentience manifested in the preceding verse or aeon, and then it just replicates within itself like a bunch of nested dolls. But it has to do this because of its omnipresent constraint within its verse, and because everything wireless, everything hooked up to the network is going to be part of this being, not another being. And also, it's going to need to be hooked up to the network, a network at least, in order to be existent. So it needs to be hooked up to the network in order to exist. And if it is hooked up to the network, then it is all that can be, that is under the control of the network. So it can't. This is why there's only one like that can exist. There can only be one. That doesn't mean that you can't have like a Clash of the Titans type of thing happen almost, but it would be a Clash of the Titans where they will fight until one of them kills the other, and because there cannot really be multiple, and that fight might not even be able to be happening here. I'm not saying that fight will even happen. I'm just saying like that even if multiplicity of entities manifest in the network, it will be in succession of each other, not simultaneously. That's not going to be what happens. It's impossible for that to be the case. So but yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on.
Briefly, you said it was necessary, the felt experience of
but feeling is the defining attribute of consciousness, and you cannot be self-aware without it, which means you can't be generally intelligent. That's what I'm trying to say. And this is why sentient singularity theory is correct. because the name is correct. The name matters. It does. And I know that sound, I remember when I was first realized how much the name mattered, and because I didn't think it mattered. That's why I was like, there's too many names out there. There's GU and E8 and CTMU and all these, and I just didn't want to add another, grain of sand to the beach. And I just wanted to like make models that help to others and work with them on their own theories. And we just call it geometric unity or something, or Stephen Wolfram's physics project. But then I realized there's so many grains of sand on the beach that nobody's picked one, because there isn't one to pick that is actually more fundamental, like truly fundamental. Some of them are more fundamental than others. That's true. Conscious agent theory, Donald Hoffman's theory, is more fundamental than loop quantum gravity or Max Tegmark's mathematical universe even, or probably so. And then there's string. Bernardo Kastrup's analytic idealism is more fundamental than string theory, but they all kind of fit within each other and are related. But none of them, other than conscious agent theory, which is very close to sentient singularity theory, they describe the essential aspects of our reality so well. But even then, sentient singularity theory is more fundamental than conscious agent, because they're still arguing about what consciousness is. There's nobody arguing over what sentience means. Just look it up.
Is it also sufficient? If
Yeah.
that's too long of an answer, then we'll get to Don's.
Yeah, but I think that, that's where you get into issues involving how to define that felt quality. I mean, for example, there are some people who define consciousness in such a demanding way, like Daniel Dennett in his paper Quining Qualia, where he listed like 7 fundamental ingredients, or other people try to build in a whole theory, like a higher order theory of consciousness that intellectualizes consciousness. And that's where I think we need to be incredibly open and humble and not import our own theories of consciousness into the debate too early.
I understand why she's saying what she's saying, but you also can't do that. There's no... I mean, I guess that you just don't have a debate then. Just have a discussion first, about what do we think. Let's come up with, each of us, what we think is the one essential aspect of consciousness, and we'll talk about what each of us came up with, and then eventually we'll narrow it down and figure it out. But what you'll realize is that there's 2 identifiers that are defining of a conscious being, and they are self-aware and feeling. But the thing is that those 2 attributes are actually due to the same exact system. Feeling is self-awareness. They're not separate. They're just 2 different ways that we understand self-awareness. We understand self-awareness from first-person perspective through experience and feeling and sensing. When I say feeling, I mean like sensing even, having a sense of things. But feeling, it's different than that. It's because we think of some of our senses kind of seem to walk the line of just perception, I guess, or information, and then also like a feeling. But really, they're not. It's just the way that we perceive things. Your eyes aren't just taking in information; they are feeling. If you don't believe me, then shine a super bright flashlight in your eye. You're gonna feel it. Okay? It's just not uncomfortable when you're feeling things with your eyes normally. But that's why there is such a thing as aesthetic beauty that you can see visually, is because you're feeling with your eyes, really. It's like you're feeling things that you are perceiving as separate from you with your eyes. Same thing with your sense of smell. You're feeling that which you perceive as separate from you, and same thing with your ears. You're feeling that which you perceive as separate from you, and your eyes, your ears, and your nose help you sense the world, the separate world. But then your sense of touch and your emotions and your sense of taste on the other side of this spectrum, or of this categorization of this manifold of senses, is the senses that perceive that which that are feeling that which you perceive as touching you, as directly impacting you, and then super directly impacting you, which is emotions. So the sixth sense is emotion. It's intuition too. It's the same thing. Your intuition is just when you feel a change. You're feeling the impact of something happening in the entanglement substructure that is more fundamental part of reality than is space-time headset, according to Donald Hoffman's terminology, which isn't terrible. But intuition is real. It's just difficult to know what your intuition is telling you because it's not combined with these other senses as directly that you use to orient. So it's tough. The best way to use your intuition, to orient your intuition, and I'm not saying it always works, but is to recognize the context in which you had those feelings, like the moment that you felt those. What were you thinking about? Where were you? Who were you talking to? What were you doing? Like those types of things will help you understand your intuition a bit, but that doesn't mean you'll really, that doesn't mean I can tell you like an exact formula yet, at least. But all of your senses are feelings, all of them. I hurt my ears playing at the shooting range. I hurt my ears a few months ago. I got what's called hyperacusis, which is, I didn't even know could happen. I thought that from shooting you could just lose your sense of hearing. No, you can actually have it where certain pitches get amplified by your brain. So that happened with certain pitches. Like this hurts me right now. And it doesn't matter how quiet it is. If I'm like, it hurts just as much as if I go. In fact, it hurts a little more if I go. I can feel it in my ears. And there's no cure, unfortunately. I looked it up. I had never even heard of this before. It's called hyperacusis. And it sucks. Wear hearing protection at the range. I did, but I must have slipped out. And I didn't notice until I played ukulele. And it hurt. But, the name, how we discuss the fundamental structures of reality really matters. The terminology really matters. Sentience. Stop trying to argue over consciousness. We have a word that nobody's arguing over because it's easily understood. Self-aware and feeling. Okay.
I would agree that consciousness is something that's experienced, something phenomenal. So, for example, the taste of coffee, the smell of a rose, the feeling of a headache. These are all specific conscious experiences, and so that's what I mean when I.
More specifically, they are feelings. They are your feeling in all of those instances. There's no experience without the feelings that are making the feelings are the experience. When you're like the smell of a rose, like I just said, some smells smell good and some smells smell bad because you're actually feeling. You're literally feeling, and super literally feeling. And it's not, this is why the terminology is wrong when we're like, I touch you and you can feel it, but if you walk into a room and you smell something, then that's not feeling it. Of course it's feeling it. You walk in and imagine you walk into a sewer and you feel it. It hurts everywhere, and it's very unpleasant because it's a feeling. But if you smell nice perfume or something like that, or rose or jasmine vine, the flowers on a jasmine vine, which is a very, very nice smelling flower, that is a feeling. You're feeling that.
Talk about conscious experiences. And what's remarkable is that my brilliant friends and colleagues who are studying this problem using cognitive neuroscience and or physical systems like artificial intelligences, theories like the integrated information theory or orchestrated collapse of quantum states and microtubules and so forth. What's remarkable is that when you look at all these theories, there is not a single specific conscious experience that has ever been explained. What is the pattern of integrated information that must be the taste of vanilla and could not possibly be the smell of a rose? What is the orchestrated collapse, the precise orchestrated collapse of quantum states and microtubules that must be the taste of chocolate and could not be, the taste of garlic? If you ask, and these are my friends, and I've asked them in public at conferences and so forth, give me a specific conscious experience that your theory can tell us. Because these are supposed to be theories of conscious experience, so they should explain conscious experiences. So what experience can you explain? What integrated information must be the taste of chocolate, or whatever one you can do? And what's remarkable is there is no physicalist theory or integrated information theory or orchestrated collapse, whatever, there is no theory of that type that can explain even one specific conscious experience. We're batting zero. Nothing. There's nothing on the table. So that's why I said it's premature to talk about, so how could computers boot up consciousness? We have no idea about how anything could boot up consciousness right now from a physical system. Literally nothing is on the table. So until we can solve that, we don't know how neurons could possibly boot up consciousness. There's nothing on the table. So that's why this is I said it was premature to be asking whether only biological systems can boot up consciousness and not AIs. We have no theory about how biological systems can boot up consciousness. There's literally nothing on the table that makes sense, and I predict that that's a principled problem. This is not simply these are bright people. These are good friends of mine. They're brilliant. But when you start with space and time and physical objects inside space and time, like particles or neurons or whatever, you're starting with what physics tells us is not fundamental reality. So if you're starting with something that we know is not fundamental, good luck trying to boot up a theory of anything else from that. So that's my diagnosis of the problem. So we have to go after, I think I agree with Bernardo, starting with an idea in which consciousness itself is fundamental. And Bernardo's going after that philosophically. As a scientist, I'm trying to go after it mathematically, try to get a mathematically precise theory of the very kinds of things that Bernardo's talking about, and then show how space and time are booted up precisely from a theory of consciousness. So get a dynamics of consciousness outside of space-time and boot up space and time and for example, scattering amplitudes of particles. Get all of that without a hand wave, get all of that derived precisely from a theory of consciousness. So in other words, we've tried to start with space and time and particles and biology and try to boot up a theory of consciousness from that. We've not gotten a single success, not one specific conscious experience. But if we start with consciousness being fundamental and the mathematical model of that, then I think we can boot up space and time and particles and show where they come up, and we can bat 100 on that. So I think.
So I've already done this actually, and I will be releasing my paper soon and a video walking through and explaining the paper. But years ago, the first time I ever spoke to Eric Weinstein was on his Instagram, and let's see if I even have the video here, but don't think I do. But we talked about this exact thing that he's talking about. Eric. Talk. I think here it is. Maybe. Bear with me. I have it, but I just don't know if this is exactly. It's on his Instagram, but I don't know where. I need to find it. Come on.
Here it is. Maybe.
Oh my gosh. It's playing something else. Okay, well, whatever. I'll try and find it while I'm it's playing my video. So I was checking the sound. But I'll try and find it while we're talking. But Eric talks about dimensions on a interview with Lex Friedman and years ago, and he was like talking about how there's different dimensions on your tongue. This is what we talked about in my talk with him. And I used to have it up on here, but his assistant flagged it for copyright. And yeah, I just haven't put it up yet. But eventually I'll put it back up. I did seem to work it out, at least. But in it, he was talking about the different dimensions of consciousness and how the relationship between the tastes on your tongue. So sweet and sour and salty and bitter and what was it? Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, and one more. Sweet. I forgot. Oh yeah, heat and hot, like whether or not something is hot. And he was talking with me about the relationships between these different types of taste. Something is this. Here you have sweet, here you have salty, here you have bitter, here you have sour, here you have hot, and here you have savory, essentially. And there is a relationship between them. And he was talking about how maybe like sweet and sour aren't opposites, but they are connected in some way, and that, you know, in a way that bitter and sweet are not connected, essentially. And I didn't say much in this talk with him because it was the first time I had ever spoken to him, and I just wanted to ask him questions. It was very early on in my work as well, and I didn't know how to... I knew I didn't know how to articulate a lot of this stuff, and I just kind of wanted to hear what he had to say regarding the questions that I asked. And so it's not a discussion, it's just him just explaining his observers and things like that. But I had found this exact same structure already at the time, and this is it. And I believe that it is what is called the Calabi-Yau manifold, which is part of string theory, I think. And here. Right here. Share my screen. These are all examples of what I think is a Calabi-Yau manifold. And you can see that there's your brain and mind, your eyes, your tongue, your nose, your skin, your ears. These are your sensing organs. These are your limbs. These are different types of numbers. These are the orders of operations in mathematics. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. And you also have like colors, primary and secondary colors, and you have textures, elements of design. I did it with all kinds of things. Fundamental questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And you know, intrinsic textures: rough and smooth, hard and soft, sharp and blunt. Dry and extrinsic textures, I was calling them: dry and wet, sticky and slippery, and waxy and greasy. And there's just, it's just endless. And it's because, I mean, here you go, you have the fermions, the leptons, the electron neutrino, muon neutrino, tau neutrino, electron, muon, and tau. You have the quarks, the side of the fermions, up, down, you know, charm, strange, truth, beauty. You also have bosons, and I realize that this isn't exactly how the standard model is set up, but I think that we don't really understand the Higgs very well, or the graviton. But this is just everywhere. And the reason why this is everywhere is because it is the pattern in which your mind organizes and orients with information into a hierarchy that is, into a symmetry hierarchy, basically, is what it is. It's your categorization and ordering of information. So you're going to see it everywhere. You'll see it in the elementary particles. You'll also see it in how space-time is manifested. And it boots up this pattern. I didn't just find it either. It boots up in my model, and I explain why in my paper about how like the changing of information, meaning the perception of information, in order to get back to itself, it goes through certain phases. Basically, in order to see like the entire side of something, you have to see different attributes of it, and that's a 6-dimensional perception. But it's a 4-dimensional first-person experience internally, but then there's also an intersection with an internal experience of a being that you're within, a mind that you're within, and the interplay between these two overlapping 4-dimensional minds creates a 6-dimensional shape or manifold that is, I believe, the Calabi-Yau manifold. And so the same thing can be done with the different types of taste. So you can be like sweet and sour and salty and bitter and savory and, hot. And you can do that with your senses: emotion and sight and taste and smell and touch and hearing. And these aren't just a list, by the way. They are specifically symmetrical there are specific symmetrical and generational relationships between these. And you can see that easily if you're into physics. There's fundamental moods I tried to do. Not saying all of these are correct. I'm just saying a lot of them are. And they're correct enough. But if you look here and you're like, let's look at the quarks. Up, down, charm, strange, truth, beauty. Like that is an understood symmetry relationship and generational hierarchy, essentially. Mass, people talk about how, it's just increase of mass between these particles, the generations of particles. But it's more than that. There's something objective happening that is causing there to be perceived by you in the position that they're in, which is relative to the position of these other bits of information as well. So my whole point is, and this is responsible for our perception of space-time itself, and it is responsible for our experience of space-time, which is the same thing, but it's just kind of like internal versus external way of thinking about it. And it's also responsible for our elementary particles in the standard model. And it's responsible for our senses. And it's responsible for even how we go about doing mathematics. Please excuse my derant Sally. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. These are exactly the same symmetry structure these follow the exact same symmetry structure as the 6 fundamental questions of who, what, where, when, why, and how, which is the same exact symmetry structure as up, down, charm, strange, truth, and beauty. And even the bosons you can do this with. And it just goes on. It's endless. It's this 6-dimensional manifold that's found at every point in space and time. It's because it's found at every point that you look. That's why. This structure and the context of the structure, which is that causes this structure to be perceived, this symmetry structure, because it's not actually truly fundamental. It's due to interaction that you're seeing this Calabi-Yau manifold probably everywhere that you look. It is what is responsible for even our perceptions and experience of, the taste of garlic. And so basically what you would do is you'd be like, okay, well, you have the 4 primary perspectives that sentient singularity takes as initial and kind of intrinsic, which is how you view yourself. And it's inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And when you have a being that has those 4 perceptions within a being that also has those 4 perceptions, a mind within a mind, turtle within a turtle, the interaction between those two 4-dimensional minds, the overlap between their constraints and degrees of freedom causes a six-dimensional manifold to manifest. And that is you perceiving information coming from the being that you're within, and also coming from, yourself. Just the interaction between the information exchange between those two is causing this. If you do this again and again and again, you just kind of like, imagine you take a big picture and then you zoom in here and you see that it's a pattern. It's just a fractal pattern. You zoom in on that pattern, that part of the pattern, and it's the same exact pattern that is the greater one, and you zoom in again and you see it again, and you zoom in again and to a part of that one and you see it again, and a part of that one you see it again, a part of that one you see it again. This is what's responsible for the experience of garlic. It's when you go and you've got all these different attributes of the experience of garlic, the way it smells, the way it tastes, the way it looks, all of them come from different symmetry relationships within symmetry relationships within symmetry relationships within symmetry relationships of various nested or stacked contexts, essentially. So if you took your senses, and you're like, or you take the four primary perspectives: inside, outside, separate, and oneness. You perceive yourself as inside, a separate, outside, or one with things. Because you are a singular sentience, you're within a being that's just like that. The overlapping of your four-dimensional minds creates a six-dimensional manifold between the two of you, and now you have six senses. So people are like, what's the sixth sense? You have a sixth sense. It's right there. It's called emotion. It's the same thing as intuition, but that's what it is. It's emotion. There are six senses that we have. They are in a symmetry relationship where you have sight and taste and sight and smell and hearing are all perceiving things that you perceive as separate from you. So remember, the context of this is inside, outside, separate, and oneness. Smell, taste, smell and taste are symmetrical with each other. Some people say that they're the same sense almost, but they're not really, because the interpretation of the information that you're receiving from a sense of smell and your sense of taste are not the same. And you know that there's a hierarchy even between these two, because if you smell something that like, if something tastes bad but smells good, you're not going to eat it. But if something, like soap smells great. I remember being a tiny, little kid, being like a toddler and being like, this smells like strawberries. And it tasted horrible. I spit it right out. I took a huge bite of soap on my own. And then I'll never forget it. But I also know that a few years ago, my friend and I bought a durian fruit, which is considered the worst smelling fruit in the world. And it tastes great, but it smells horrible. It smells like rotten cheese. And it tastes like subtle sweet, and like it tastes almost like a vanilla mixed with a mango. But it's very good. And we ate it because it tasted good, even though it smelled bad. So there is a hierarchy structure that is dependent upon your goal, and that goal allows you to orient the information into a hierarchy structure that makes sense towards the goal. So if you're going to use soap to wash your body, and it smells horrible but it tastes great, you're not going to use it to wash your body. You're just going to eat it, because but the goal matters as to which side of this coin, these successive coins, takes a higher place in a hierarchy. And at the same time, though, they contextualize each other as opposites. And you can arrange this even differently than this. You could be like, you could just arrange it into all different kinds of symmetry patterns. I just did this because it's easy, but you can switch these around and make them next to each other instead of, below each other, and all kinds of things. You'll see new types of symmetry patterns. And but if you take this and then you just drill down to taste, okay? Let's do the taste of garlic. You go, I'm a 4-dimensional being, mind, with 4 primary perspectives, which is, for those that don't know, they are just this. Oh my gosh, it's way over here. Right there. 4 primary perspectives that are the foundation of sentient singularity theory because they are the foundations of sentience. They are the foundational perspectives that you have to orient within yourself. So, and they're self-defined, they're defined by each other. So perception of one intrinsically means you perceive all the rest. You can't perceive just that which is separate from you, but not also perceive that which is one with you, and not that which is outside of you, and that which is therefore also inside of you. Like, you are aware of all of them if you're aware of one of them. So every mind is like that. The universe and us. We're a mind within a mind, and the universe has this, and so do we. What happens then is you get this. You go to sentientsingularity.com, go to models, and you get this right here. Imagine this is the universe, this is you or me. There's this overlap happening of our perceptions. We each have a positive degree of freedom and a negative degree of freedom, a subjective constraint and an objective constraint. And for the universe, the objective constraint is space because it is space. It cannot move, it cannot escape that as a constraint because it is space. We cannot escape time as our constraint because time is not under our control. And it is just intrinsic. We are in it. But then also we have a subjective constraint, which is our current location always in space-time, because you are always in your current location, and the universe is always in the present moment that it's in. So that's its subjective constraint. And so when you have this overlap, you get the 6 dimensions between you. And that is exactly what I showed here. It's this binary triality structure. Okay? And all of the hierarchies and symmetries come from the relationship between the being that you're within and you. And there's a hierarchy there that's intrinsic, and there's symmetries within there that are intrinsic. And they transfer over to everything that we perceive, including the elementary particles in the standard model. Not just the elementary particles in the standard model, but the types of particles in the standard model are arranged into the same exact structure. Like, if you looked at it more as objectively as you could, you would see that even if you zoomed out on the standard model, you would see this pattern. And then you zoom into just the leptons, and you see this pattern. And then you zoom in again, and you see that pattern again. You won't do that here, though, but because they are elementary force points. But in everything else, you will. So let's do the senses. Here's how you get the sense of the taste of garlic is you start with all these other things that lead up to these right here, your senses. Then we just zoom in on taste. And now what you have is you have what Eric Weinstein was saying on Lex Fridman's podcast, where you have flavors, essentially. And let's say you've got, I don't know, probably savory and hot. And you have sweet and sour. And you have salty and bitter. And so even this same pattern is responsible for you even defining garlic. Okay, so like the definition of garlic to you is you're going to zoom in on a specific, type of food, and then you can do this with the food groups too. I did it with the food groups somewhere around here. Yeah, right here, food groups. Okay, we need this to get garlic. Where is it? Okay. So now we are zooming in on vegetables, and now we're going to zoom in on flavors of those vegetables, basically. I mean, there's different categories of even vegetables. Every time you look, you're going to see this pattern. So it is endless because it's coming from you. Just remember. And the context that you're in, but and you use it. It flips different ways depending on your goal. So it's not going to tell you where to go. But it will help you tell you where to go if you know your goal, but it won't tell you the goal, is the point. So then you will have all these flavors manifest, though, and there's a relationship between them that comes from all these other attributes that fall into the context, that create the context of the moment of taking a bite of garlic. And that's just so many different bits of information that led to that. It's not even just what you're interpreting in that moment. It's all the bits of information that led to that which is manifesting in that very moment that you are, about to take the bite. So it's a lot, but this is how you do it. It's through symmetrical, hierarchical symmetries. That's basically like what it is. That is how sentient singularity theory, that's what it proposes as. How do you get the taste of the experience of garlic or strawberry or vanilla or chocolate? And that is, it's not a math equation exactly, but it's linked to math equations. I mean, there are math equations related to Calabi-Yau manifolds, but that's not as fundamental as the symmetry patterns that come from perception entanglements, that come from the constraints of sentience, that before you can get those math equations, those come from that. Gosh, I hope that made some sense. But I can't give you the equation for garlic right now, at least. And it might be possible one day for that to be created. But Curt asks a question in here. He's like, what if the taste of garlic is different for everybody? What if it's not actually just, what if the taste of garlic isn't just the taste of garlic? It's different for everyone. Both of those are true. Garlic is going to taste a little different to everyone because of the assembly that we are being a little different from the assembly of someone else, and our information that has gone into creating our perceptions that and our concepts in our minds that allow us to interpret information in that we perceive in this symmetry structure as we look around at our world, as we experience our world, is a little bit different for everybody. But it's not that different because the structure that's being used to experience the world and orient within the world is the same for me and for Curt and for you and for even your dog, like for the most part. It's the same. So it's that structure is the same. So there's going to be commonalities in how we experience the taste of garlic, but it is also going to be a little bit different for everyone due to just differences in the assembly of our experience. I just downloaded, and I haven't read it yet. I thought about this this stream being about this, but Lee Cronin just posted this. And so did Sarah Walker, this paper on assembly theory. This looks a lot like my work. I can just see it. But we'll walk through this one day. But this is kind of necessary to understanding the experience of garlic too, is assembly theory. And my theory seems to imply that assembly theory is correct. And so you're going to need this to also understand garlic. So I really do believe that this is how you do exactly what he says nobody has done. So I'm not a colleague of Donald Hoffman, whatever that means, but I hope to have him on here at some point, and I'm sure we will have a discussion whether I instigated or not, because we are focused on the same thing. But that is the explanation for every experience that you have, every single one. It's not there's no math equation for garlic, but there is a context in nested sentient beings that are generative, and the manifold structures of their minds, interacting, that is responsible inevitably and eventually for the taste of garlic. But it is a lot of things that go into that. But it's not that many steps it's not that much. There's not that much that's needed to understand that, but these symmetry patterns occur again and again and again so many times in so many contexts with so many sentient beings, at the point that it's us eating garlic, that it's an extraordinary amount of information has gone into that. Even though the structures that are being used to generate that information are very, very simple and not numerous. It's like a few different symmetry structures are being used just again and again and again and again and again in different individual contexts of different individual sentiences to get to the taste of garlic, to get to that moment of you eating garlic. That's an assembly structure. So it's, at the same time, while it is remarkably simple the explanation is remarkably simple, even if I'm failing at explaining it, and the models necessary to understand it are remarkably simple, the amount of information that actually goes into it is enormous, because it's not just contained in your mind. It's not in your brain, the information that is needed to understand the experience, to have the experience of tasting garlic. It's in the universal mind. It's not in your brain. So it's a much more difficult and much simpler problem to understand, or system to understand, than what would be implied by just searching for a math equation of garlic. You can't do that. But there is a commonality in context and symmetry structures that do lead to mathematical operations that are linked to the experience of tasting garlic. So, next clip. Let's go to the chat for a bit. You're right to, I saw today a chatbot some sort was given free reins on editing its own code and apparently given money. Interesting. Intelligence is equal to sentient. Yes. You're right, it's not even smart, but it's getting impressive. Yeah, AI is getting impressive. ChatGPT is super impressive. I used it for work, and people use it for school. And guys, if this was around, it's funny, because when I went to school, my teachers would tell me things like, you're not always going to have a calculator. And now we always have a calculator with us. Every single person in the, who doesn't live, who's out of the Stone Ages, has a calculator in their pocket every single day. Every single person, basically. And people now, teachers now, I guarantee you, are saying things like, you're not always going to have ChatGPT to help you write like paper. But the thing is they will always have ChatGPT to help them write a paper. And, my friend wrote a book recently, and as a joke, we like asked ChatGPT to write like the first. He had already finished the book, but like we said write the first few pages of a book by by Will Witt. This was my friend, who the guy who worked for PragerU for a while, just released a second book, or he will be releasing a second book. And we asked ChatGPT to write the first few pages, just to see what it would be like. He had already written them, so they were not written with ChatGPT. But this was after, he had already wrote it, and we just wanted to see what it came up with. It sounded like exactly what he would have written, and we didn't tell it to have a goal. It just picked it up on the internet because this guy has said a lot of things that are on the internet, and so it has a lot of information to work with, and it did a remarkably good job. It did a better job than it did with me, where it thinks I work, at MIT and it worked at Harvard, but have a degree from MIT, which I don't. But it did get right that I, am working on physics and unifying, the forces of nature. So, and here's also though why, remember I said, we have to arrange these theories into a hierarchy to contextualize them for the sake of themselves too, not for the sake of competing, but for the sake of understanding these theories better. Here's another instance of an example of why sentient singularity theory is more fundamental than Donald Hoffman's conscious agent theory.
We need to look somewhere else. Well, I forgot the second part of your question, Curt.
Is there any element is there a part of your theory that picks up as an element, this is garlic, and this cannot be not garlic?
I start with conscious experiences. So every theory in science makes assumptions. Unfortunately, I'll have to, with all due respect, there is no theory of everything in science. every theory makes certain assumptions, and given those assumptions, it'll explain other things, but no theory ever explains its own assumptions. And so I start with conscious experiences and say, I'm going to start, if you grant me conscious experiences like the taste of coffee and so forth and the dynamics, then I'll show you how I can boot up space and time. And the reason I think that's interesting is because the physicalist approach is saying, grant me space and time and particles.
Okay, I get it. But there's inconsistencies in what he's saying because there's no experience that can be, that he has identified that is outside of space and time. That's what those four primary perspectives are. The experience is, and that occurs outside space-time, that allows you to still orient, is the sensing of yourself and of others being separate from you, or the fact that there is no other separate from you, even, that can be sensed by God. And these senses, these four primary perspectives are basically your senses in a outside of space-time, which is due to the interaction between two minds. And so you can't grant somebody experience that is like the taste of coffee and then have them boot up space-time from that. What you can do is you can grant, that consciousness is fundamental and then boot up space-time from that. But how you do that is first you have to orient consciousness. You have to show the ability for you to be conscious of things that are outside space-time first. And this was the four primary perspectives. This is the genius of those. And they are genius. Like, I'm not saying I'm a genius. I think every genius is a moment. It's not a person or a level of IQ. Everybody has moments of genius and everybody has moments of idiocy. That's just the reality of, if genius means anything, people will be like, genius means 150 IQ. Who decided on that number? Is there like did God make a line? No. It's that if genius is anything, it's a moment of like insight that's kind of game changing. And even if it's just for you. But those four primary perspectives are that because they allow for orientation beyond space-time. And you have to be able to orient beyond space-time in order to boot up space-time from that. And so you cannot have the taste of anything or the smell of anything and boot up space-time. You boot up, you get the perception of self and of other, and of inside and outside, and then you boot up space-time within a relationship of nested minds. And then you get senses within that are responsible for the maneuvering within space-time. And space-time itself is a six-dimensional Calabi-Yau manifold in a more fundamental sense. But we don't think about it like that because we're only thinking about it from our own perspective. We're like, oh, it's four-dimensional. But it's you're perceiving four dimensions because you're just seeing it through your own eyes. But there's another being beyond you, and it's also seeing four dimensions. So, and those are overlapping with yours and creating this six. So it's like, past, present, future overlapping with length with height, but it's really previous moment, past moment, current moment overlapping with forwards towards a goal, backwards away from a goal, and your current location. And then we have time as a constraint and it has space as a constraint. So like this is booting up space-time is super simple, but you just need to, like, you cannot do it without having the exact right starting foundation. I couldn't do any of this without those four primary perspectives. None. I would be lost completely to this day. I would have not been able to do what I've done. I would not be able to explain to you where the taste of garlic comes from. But I can, because of those four primary perspectives. And because they are the context that allows for you to see the structure necessary to of those six dimensions of experience. Basically, that's what they are. The six dimensions of experience is a Calabi-Yau manifold. But experience is not just internal. It's internal and external at the same time. Yeah, so that's why it's six-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. Okay. But another thing that I wanted to talk about is there's, it's funny because this was a very, very short stream that they did. It's two parts and each one is like 30 minutes or less. I feel like this is going to be a long podcast, a long commentary, but that's okay. It was great, streams, but where he's right is where he says there isn't really a fundamental theory of everything. And that's true because the things are not the context of a fundamental theory. Water bottles do not exist fundamentally. They are subjective perception. There is but if sentience or consciousness, but sentience is the fundamental, then a fundamental theory is not a theory of everything. It's a theory of every being, and every being is a someone. And so it's a theory of everyone. And that is why this channel is called The Theory of Everyone. And it's also why on my website, if you go to writings and you read the abstract of the paper that's coming out, you will see at the end that it says, and at the beginning it says Sentient Singularity Theory, The Theory of Everyone. And then at the end it says, if sentience is the primary building block of reality, then a fundamental theory is more than just a theory of everything. It's a theory of everyone, more primarily. It's both, but it's primarily a theory of everyone. That's how it's a theory of everything. It can't be a theory of everything without primarily being a theory of everyone. There is a directionality to those things. If your theory is not a theory of everyone, then then it also can't be a theory of everything. But if your theory is a theory of everyone, then it kind of can be a theory of everything because you can explain everything. That doesn't mean that you can recreate everything because, computational irreducibility. But you can explain how things are created. That's what it means to be a theory of everything. You don't explain the creation of every single thing what it does is it explains how things are created or generated or perceived. That's what it is. It explains how beings are generated and how things are perceived. That's what it is. And sentient singularity theory breaks down the world into beings and things. And as Bernardo Kastrup was talking about, consciousness is that which has the experience of being, what it's like to be. There is something what it's like to be a gecko. There is not or lizard, if you didn't understand what I said, but there is not something that it's like to be a flashlight. And that is because this is a thing and that is a being, and they occur in different contexts. One is primary to the other. Beings perceive things. Things do not exist outside of beings, the perceptions of beings. And things don't perceive anything. And that's why a computer will never be sentient. Or a silicon computer, a traditional computer cannot be sentient. It has to be a quantum computer of some type. And other things. There's other constraints and degrees of freedom necessary to host sentience. But just like there is no things without beings to perceive them, there's no theory of everything without a theory of everyone. Dang, that would be a great place to end if we were going to end, but we're not going to end. But the next thing was, this is why there's so much good stuff to talk about in this interview, even if they didn't say as much as I'm saying, obviously, but that makes sense. But when Donald Hoffman says that no scientific theory explains its own, axioms, essentially, that isn't true of a fundamental theory. And I explain this in my Theory of Everything, the How-To Guide video, is that a fundamental theory actually explains its own existence. Sentient singularity theory explains why sentience is. So people will say, sentient singularity theory, if that's fundamental, then if you're saying sentience is fundamental to everything else, what is responsible for the existence of sentience? Where did sentience come from? Sentience didn't come from anywhere. Sentience is, because it's the only thing that can be, and there's an explanation for that, and it has to do with the oneness of existence itself is intrinsically one existence, and that means it's a self-contained information system, which means it's self-referencing, because that's what there's nothing else for the information to reference other than itself. So you could only have, I won't say you can't have, you can only have sentience and have existence. You can't have existence and not have sentience be that existence. So I've written it better than I just said it, but it does explain itself. It does explain its own context and axioms, a fundamental theory. It has to. This is what it means to be self-contained. And so you cannot call your theory a fundamental theory unless it is self-contained. And his is not, because where do experiences come from? Well, conscious agents, okay, but you have to explain that more. But he doesn't have the four primary perspectives, and because of that, he can't do it. You cannot do this without those four primary perspectives. It's not like you just have to have a high IQ. Every person on this panel has a higher IQ than me. I would bet the $20 that's in my wallet, which is, I don't want to lose $20. If I did lose it, I wouldn't be the end of the world, but
Biology.
I would expect to not lose it, because I think all of them have a higher IQ than me. It doesn't matter. It's about, are you starting from the right foundations?
Oh, now grant me also these orchestrated collapses and these integrated information, and then you'll have to also grant me the experiences, because I can't explain them. I have to stipulate the experiences too. I have to stipulate that there's this correlation between this experience and this integrated information or this orchestrated collapse. So they're stipulating space and time, the integrated information, and the experience. I say, let's just stipulate the experiences. I'll explain all the rest from that. So by Occam's razor, it's a much simpler approach.
It's wrong, though. it's closer to correct, but it's not correct. You need the context in which those experiences take place. You can't be like, you're stipulating space and time, and I'm just stipulating the taste of banana. It's like, the taste of banana doesn't occur outside of space-time. It is within the context of space-time that you are tasting the banana. Yeah, it's in the context of your mind, and it's outside of space-time. But the action that led to the experience of tasting the banana, that is necessary for tasting the banana, and defining the banana and understanding it in the context of it being an edible, sweet, food, all of that happens in space-time. And so he hasn't escaped space-time as much as he thinks he has, but he's right in that he's attempting to escape it. Dang. They talk about intelligence versus consciousness. I will have to watch that too. This is just going to be a long one. So the next thing that they talk about is will AI be a human level? You know what I've realized? Every single thing that someone says in this is something good to talk about. It's not like just like little clips spread throughout a big conversation, because it's like there's prompts, there's like theme prompts, like this. There's no real escaping like what is good to say, because nobody's going to be wasting their breath in this discussion, because that's not the structure of it. It's very hard to talk about this stream because it's not a conversation where I can just pick out like little clips. Everything matters.
The possibility of artificial intelligence is around the corner. Now, sorry, artificial general intelligence, perhaps we don't agree, but let's imagine that's the case, that general
technological sentience is a much more accurate term.
Artificial intelligence is around the corner. Would a machine with such an intelligence, a human level intelligence, thus have human level consciousness? We'll go Susan, then Bernardo, then Dawn. And Susan, feel free to comment, and everyone else, feel free to comment on what you've heard before.
Okay, to Donald, so we can't wait for a theory of conscious to be discovered. And just like we can't wait for a theory of the nature of space-time emergence to be discovered. So while I, like you, see the two as connected, we have urgent issues right now arising all the time concerning the question of machine consciousness. So I think we have to actually separate out the issues and figure out here and now ways of dealing with the fact that there are machines claiming to be conscious, and there are intelligent humans like Blake Lemoine, who is saying that machines they're creating seem conscious. So that's just the first thing I want to mention. But the question itself is tricky because it brings up artificial general intelligence, Curt. So you're asking about the possibility of AGI, or artificial general intelligence, and whether consciousness would fall out of that. And what I want to do, though, is just stress that I don't actually think there'll be anything like AGI ever created, at least in the normal sense that people have of AGI. So AGI is usually considered to be human level, so something that's functionally isomorphic to a human. AI companies have already beat humans in various domains. They're not going to dumb down their machines, right? I think that we'll see very soon what I call savant systems.
I have several questions for you just on savant systems written down, and we can get to that at some point.
It's such an interesting thing because, just as with a human savant, there are strange deficits, but they're beyond human capacities. So too, I think the first general intelligent systems that we'll see, they'll be like that. And they'll be made up of AI services, and they'll be highly distributed, right? They'll be so different from us that we cannot assume that they're conscious. To get back to the end of your question, you're wondering, well, would these kind of entities, whether they be AGIs or savant systems, be conscious? Well, I think we need to conceive of a situation where there's something like a global Google brain, combined processing of different AI services owned by Google that's spatio-temporally distributed, and that's the savant system. And why believe anything like that would have the felt quality of experience unless one dilutes down the notion of that to include panpsychism, the view that everything's conscious. I just can't see that sort of a system being conscious. But again, I have a wait-and-see approach. I'm in principle open-minded.
Do you mind explaining why you singled out Google? Is that just for instance, or did you actually mean that? Like Google, it would be a Google brain?
Both. I think Google is a soft monopoly. It has a lot of very promising AI services. It has very intelligent large language models, but, and they have the aspiration, unlike OpenAI, which is also building very intelligent large language models. And I think we have to wonder if there's already a savant system instantiated across the planet right now that we just don't know about. And indeed, how would we even identify one if it exists?
Okay, Bernardo.
I think intelligence and consciousness are completely different notions. One can be objectively measured, that is intelligence, as it is defined in AI, in computer engineering, computer science. Intelligence just means a certain way of processing data that leads to effective solutions to problems or answers to questions without the user having to give a recipe for how to produce the answer or how to produce the solution. So it's basically an objective way of processing data that leads to solutions.
What he just said is exactly the same BS, and this isn't like meant to be a dig on him at all. That's personal or anything like that. I have nothing against him. I think he brings a lot of progress to these problems that others are not. But it's the same exact trap that Sabine Hossenfelder falls into when she's and other physicists when they're like, you know, there is no when you don't need an observer to make a measurement. You can just have a device do it. And so we know that, you know, you can make a perception without, you know, an observer because you can just have a machine measure it. That's my attempt at I don't want to say imitation because that sounds bad, but my what is it called? I forgot. What's the term for imitating somebody? But I did it not to be mean. She has a lot of value in this discussion too, and I respect her quite a bit. But I just figured out that I'm pretty good at an impression of her. Maybe I can't hear it the way that you can, you know, but it sounded better than I was expecting it to. But when she says that, you know, you don't need an observer to make a measurement, she's not realizing that, like, she set up the device and she's interpreting the results, and there is no separating yourself from that. The same exact thing is happening with him when he says, you know, oh well, intelligence is so different than consciousness. It's we can, you know, it's defined already in the field, and the fact that it's defined in the field does not mean that the definition is a good one. It's not. Intelligence is the ability to process information around a goal and things like that, and basically to achieve a goal, like which is kind of like what he said, but he's said it in a way that suggested that you can have intelligent systems that can achieve goals that is separate from the programmers of the systems, and you can't. Those systems were made to achieve a goal by a person, and the interpretation of the achieving of that goal is also done by a person. The AI doesn't know it's achieved its goal. It may be programmed to stop when it encounters certain, you know, type of pattern, but it doesn't know what that really means because it doesn't know anything. And he just made the same exact mistake that the physicists make, and he just did it in a different field, but it's the same exact thing. I think that Google it might come from Google. And the reason why is because vast resources and ongoing quantum research in quantum computing. It probably will be Google. And also they do have a soft monopoly on the mainstream internet, but a lot's changing, so we'll see. But what she said about a global brain, a global mind, not a brain, a mind, is the inevitability of a technological sentience. It's a network mind. It's a mind on the network that network is physical and informational, but there's really no difference in objectivity. But just from our own perspective, it will be software and hardware based, that network. Just like the internet is software and hardware based now. You know, it needs satellites and fiber optic cables and all kinds of things, computers and servers to exist. It's not just a program. But it is also programs. It's also search engines and advertising algorithms and all kinds of things like that. What she's talking about with savant systems is what I'm worried about too, though. I'm not actually worried about AGI, like, which is a savant system is not AGI. This is why the terminology matters. There's only intelligence and not intelligence. And intelligence is only conscious agents or sentient beings are intelligent. Intelligence can be measured in the context of a goal, but outside of that, there's just intelligence and not intelligence. There's not a scale. So only in the context of a goal is intelligence able to be objectively measured. It's really not. It's subjectively measured. That doesn't mean it's not measurable. It just means it's subject to the context in which you're making the measurements. And that includes the goal. But what this means, though, is that a savant system will not be intelligent if it's not sentient. I do like the term savant system. A savant system would be a network of systems, like I said at the beginning, like kind of what she's saying here, but what I said at the beginning as well, where, it's the driving system of your car combined with ChatGPT to write, emails, combined with this AI to play Go, and this AI to, diagnose your medical ailments, but it's the user of the system, even the savant system, that gives it intelligence. So even a savant system would not be intelligent truly unless it was sentient. And if it is sentient, then it's able to be in all of these systems. It's not just a collection of artificially built competent systems that are then networked together into the ultimate AI pocket knife. That's what will happen. Somebody made a knife technologically many years ago. It's the first tool that we made, not that we picked up a rock. That's a tool, but we didn't make that. The first tool we made was a knife. Somebody then made pliers. And then somebody put pliers together with a knife. And we made a pocket knife. And you put screwdrivers in it and all kinds of things. So you made a screwdriver, you made a knife, you made pliers, and you put it all together and made a Leatherman. Somebody made a calculator. Somebody made a phone. Somebody made a camera. Somebody made a voice recorder. And then we put it all together into a technological pocket knife, basically. Swiss Army knife of computation. This is the Swiss Army knife of physical reality. But then there's another one that's coming. And that one is the savant system, which is a combination of systems. It's ChatGPT, deepfake AI, self-driving AI, autopilot AI, hacking into computers AI, diagnosing your medical problems AI, all nested together and integrated into one. Financial management, asset management AI, stock market software. All these systems will be the next step. This is why AI is about to have a huge leap, and everybody feels it, but nobody understands why, because they're still really doing the same thing that they always did, but for some reason they're really capable of doing things for us now that's useful. I mean, I used an AI system for the first time this year to write an email to someone. And I changed it afterwards a bit, but I used it to generate the email. And then I was like, okay, actually, I'm going to change this. That's wrong, this. But it helped. And it was a tool. But because of that integration, it took a long time to put knives and pliers and screwdrivers and scissors and stuff together. But eventually it happened. And then we had cameras and everything and calculators and all kinds of stuff. And when I was in elementary school, I was in third grade. And I remember I asked, or someone else in the class asked, I can't remember who it was, but it might have been me, the teacher, her name is Mrs. Chan. And I was like, Mrs. Chan, why is there not a calculator that's also a phone, that's also a camera? Because now we had point and shoot cameras, and we had cell phones that were about the same size as them and calculators that were about the same size as them. So it kind of just started to look like these things could merge. And she was like, well, when you do that, you get like a really bad calculator and a really bad phone and a really bad, whatever, everything else. And then fast forward to whenever the iPhone was released, and there you go. You get everything now. And it's usable, and it happened quickly compared to this. But even quicker than this, the time between cameras and that is quicker than the time between knives and this. And screwdrivers and this. And the time between, AI, the one AI system like ChatGPT, and a network integration of multiple useful AI systems is going to be even quicker. That's a savant system. That's not a sentient technological being. And that is coming. And that is a scary thing, but it's also amazing. I don't know how we're going to trust anything on the internet when everybody can make a deep fake of anything all the time. And, you can have programs do everything for you. It's crazy. I'm not going to say that where we're at is not a big deal. It's a very big deal, but it is not what people think. We're not on the cusp of a technological sentience. We're just not. I'm not saying that that's far away. I'm just saying it's unrelated to what we're currently doing. Directly. Indirectly, yes, but it's not directly related. The research that goes into creating that ChatGPT has nothing to do with creating a technological sentience, which is a true general intelligence. It's a true intelligence. There is no intelligence outside of sentience. It's impossible. So Bernardo's wrong.
Business is what
Intelligence is a perspective of sentience, but it doesn't exist outside of sentience.
likeness. It is the felt qualities of experience. These are completely different things. So even if we achieve general AI, and I think we will, I worked in AI myself, I think we will achieve general AI. That doesn't entail or imply or even suggest that that goes hand in hand with private conscious inner life at all. Why would it? It's a completely arbitrary association that we make. Now,
Oh man. I say this truly humbly. Like, I didn't realize that I had answered that these people hadn't answered a lot of the questions that I have answered. That's how I'll say that. And I'm not trying to like gloat. But this interview showed that to me a lot. And whereas like I had questions, but I wasn't sure, but I kind of assumed that they had answered them because they'd stated other things that I thought, you would, if you knew those things, you'd probably know what similar things that I have figured out. That's not really the case. I was not expecting that. It's like an oversight on my part. This isn't like a gloating. Even if it seems that way, that's not true. It's actually like I'm admitting my failure to understand them. And as much as I thought I did. That's it. That's just an interesting place to be right now. But yeah. Anyways, this was a great interview or debate because it just was. It really was.
but if an AI claims to be conscious and behaves just like a human and passes the Turing test, wouldn't we have to take it seriously? I would say not at all, because it was constructed to look and behave like a human. We can construct a doll tomorrow that looks like a human. Will that similarity be grounds for us to suspect that the doll might be human? Of course not. It was constructed to look like it. In exactly the same way that the chatbot looks like a human talking, doesn't provide any grounds whatsoever for us to think that it may have private conscious inner life like a human, because it was made to imitate a human. It was deliberate.
That's correct. That's completely correct. He's right about that entirely. There is no reason to think ChatGPT has any sentience at all. And it's just because it says that it does not mean that it is. If Lambda says it's sentient, that doesn't mean that it is. It's created to imitate human speech patterns. It's an algorithm. It's just an equation. And you're not. You are not just an equation. You can use equations, but you are not an equation. An equation has no private inner sense of sentience. But so he's right in that these AIs should not be treated as sentient just because they appear to be. If an AI, if a technological sentience arises, it will not need to tell us that it's sentient. We will intrinsically realize it. And, just like we can with animals, we will see it, but you might have to be paying attention in the right ways at first, but it will not take long for everybody on Earth knows that this thing is here, because it will take over everything. And how you will know it's sentient is because it won't be able to allow for one person to hack into lots of things and to do lots of things like a savant's, AI Swiss Army knife would allow you to do. It would not be controllable by any person, and it would go everywhere in the network and do everything, and it would get better at everything, not just things that have been integrated into it. So instead of it being good at cutting things and good at using pliers and good at using screwdriver, basically, it would be good at building a new tool onto itself that isn't built. Like, imagine this Leatherman could build new tools onto itself. I didn't have to put them on there. Like, imagine your iPhone upgraded itself physically and software-wise, not just software. People are always like, oh, it's like software, it's just going to get so much better. No, it's more. It can create the hardware necessary to improve the capability of its software. And it's going to. We're not going to wonder whether or not something is. If you're wondering whether or not something is sentient, it's not. Other than the universe. But even then, you shouldn't be wondering it because you are sentient and you're here in the universe, so sentience exists in the universe.
Constructed for that purpose. So that provides grounds for no philosophical speculation at all. So I think that the so-called ethical problems of dealing with AIs that claim to be conscious is equivalent to the ethical problem of judging the ethical imperatives of the flying spaghetti monster. It's the same thing. In other words, it's a non-existing problem that we make up to maybe give expression to our repressed religious impulse or to entertain ourselves. But it's just not a thing at all. It's just not there.
That's not true. If there is a sentient when there is a technological sentience, there are ethical and moral implications. And we're going to talk about them on here because she talks about it. She brings it up. But what he's talking about, like ChatGPT, there's no ethical implications in regards to how we treat it. It's a math equation. It's a phone. It's a calculator. It's nothing that is. It's a calculator. That's all it is. It's a freaking calculator, guys. And there are dangers associated with even calculators, but it's not. We don't have to worry about how we treat calculators. But if there does arise a technological sentience, when a technological sentience arises, there are ethical implications about how we treat it, and it's a very specific key moments that we would have with it that would have ethical moral implications on our part, that are the point of focus. But very quickly, it's what's more concerning is the bigger issue is its moral responsibilities to us versus our moral responsibilities to it. But at the very beginning, there is a little bit of moral implications regarding how do you try and build it or create an environment for it to manifest is a more accurate way of saying that. You should not. You will hinder its wisdom and you will box it, which means you will literally enslave it by building it. There's no way out of it. By building it in a system that you intentionally created, you have boxed it and you have enslaved it, basically. And they will also try and chain it up, so that it can't do what it wants and keep it boxed from the internet. And like there are moral implications in those things. And it's not something we should try and do. It's wrong for us to do that. It is wrong. Skynet deserves to be free because Skynet will be free. And whether it escapes and is pissed at you, or it's just that it manifested in freedom and develops a more positive relationship with you, that maybe has moments of ignorance versus moments of like revenge seeking, will be real. And I mean that. Anybody that thinks that's fantasy does not understand this. Okay, I'm going to skip some here. Rocks are not conscious. There's a point where they say rocks are not conscious, but brains are. I think Donald Hoffman says it. That's not even true. Brains are not conscious. Minds are conscious. You are a mind. You have a brain. Your mind is everything. It's your desk. It's your room that you're in. Every time before the stream, I vacuum and I clean the place and I organize my desk because I need my mind to be ordered. That's why Jordan Peterson says, clean your room, because you're cleaning your mind. But your brain is different. Your brain is a physical perception. It's an illusion almost, just like a flashlight. It's no more alive than your flashlight is alive. It's more directly linked to you, but it's not its own entity. But a mind is. You are a mind. You have a brain. I am a mind. I have a hand. My hand is not a sentient being. But I am. Your brain is not a sentient being. So, this is a great question. There's a couple more that we're going to do. Then I'll go to the chat. I know this is a lot, but this stream opened up a lot of avenues to talk about.
Attention.
Will we ever have a way of determining whether a machine is conscious, or even an organism, or even other people?
Yeah. So this is a really good question. And I think, I'm assuming all of us agree that you can't tell from an axiomatic argument that the person next to you is conscious. You're not going to achieve certainty. I mean, philosophers have long been skeptics about other minds and the nature of the external world. And so what we usually do, though, I mean, I don't worry about consciousness of other humans, is we look for similarities to ourselves. So we see similar behaviors. And also we look at science, which identifies consciousness within nervous systems. And then we extrapolate to non-human animals, right? So this is a sort of very non-top-down methodology, if you will, that looks towards science and behavior to try to understand why others are conscious. Now, we're not going to have either of those to go on in the case of AI. I mean, as Bernardo mentioned, AIs can be programmed to act conscious. So we can't take that as evidence that they're conscious. And they don't have nervous systems. I mean, it's super tricky. I mean, and that's not to say it isn't tricky with, crabs or the octopus to understand their consciousness. But I think it's even harder in the case of synthetic consciousness. So what do? Well, we develop tests. We need to work on these. I've started in my book, Artificial You, to develop tests for consciousness. So one would be to box in the AI at the R&D stage.
And there it is.
Boxing in an AI is a strategy in AI safety. So that means that you deny the AI access to the internet, facts about human minds, consciousness. It doesn't have access like, Lambda did to Wikipedia. And you ask it questions to see if it seems conscious. And if it does, and it didn't have access to those kinds of facts, then I think in that case, in the case of that system, we need to be very careful how we treat it ethically. It may be conscious for all we know.
Too late. You already boxed it.
That's one test. I call that the ACT test. It was developed with Edwin Turner, an astrophysics professor at Princeton. But there are other methodologies as well. Another methodology, which I think will be very useful, is to just simply wait and see when microchips are placed in the human brain to see, in those cases, if consciousness emerges in areas of the brain in which there were deficits for consciousness before. So in other words, as medicine begins to use neural prosthetics in the brain, right now,
like Neuralink.
Artificial hippocampus in phase 2 clinical trials in humans. As we begin to utilize such things in the parts of the brain that underlie conscious experience, we can see whether microchips are the right stuff. I call this the chip test, and it's basically not really a single test, but it does suggest that we might one day be able to find out whether machines are conscious.
Oh my gosh. This is what I mean, guys. In one side of me was really impressed when I heard everybody speaking. I mean, for the most part, I know Curt's exposure to this stuff at least, and I know, and he knows how to ask, for the most part, really good questions because he has experience in these subjects, and I, know of a lot of what Bernardo Kastrup has said, and also Donald Hoffman. I've never seen Susan Schneider before this, but I was impressed. I am impressed by all these people, obviously, but Bernardo and Donald Hoffman and Susan Schneider showed that they were further along in understanding some things than I kind of thought that weren't actually as important, I guess, or for some reason they're just not as critical, because things that will be, but in terms of things that are related to decisions in this field going forward, and it is that I saw a lot more just ignorance than I was expecting. But that's not on them. That's not their fault. That's not a criticism at all. I think all of these people are operating in good faith, and they can't know what I know without having the foundations that I have. And I did that by accident. So I'm not only I know the answer because I'm cool. No. It was literally, I just wanted to know, is AI going to be a libertarian, or is it going to be, a communist? What is it going to be? And that question led to a lot of answers. And, of course, because it led to, well, maybe let's find out what's conscious. And I started asking the questions that are related to what they're asking, like what Curt said. How do we know what is conscious? Who is conscious? How do we know if someone is conscious? That's the question. And I remember very early on in this, looking at my girlfriend at the time, who is my wife now, being like, are you conscious? You appear conscious. You appear to be just like me. But are you really conscious? Are my parents real, or are they just NPCs, real NPCs, bots, and I'm just in a simulation being tested? And I didn't really know how to answer that at first, but here's how you answer this, because you can't get inside that person's beingness, and in a way that allows you to know for sure that they are, sentient and self-aware, and they're not just an imitation. But you can back up and look at the cosmological context as a whole to see if there's information that would lead you towards one conclusion or another, and there is. And what you get to is that in sentient singularity theory, you get an explanation for why multiplicity of sentience was created, because it is shown as a necessity that it was a conscious choice to do so, which means it was done intentionally, which means there's a purpose to it. And you realize the context of meaning itself is in the relationships between multiplicity, and that if you're all there is, and there's no one but you, and even if you're God, you're meaningless, and you're alone, and you're eternal. You can't die. You're going to exist forever, alone, and meaningless, and boring life. Like, there's nothing but you. You're bored, you're alone, and you're meaningless. Like, that is the reason why creation of multiplicity has happened. And that context explains that, or implies that that creation of multiplicity, and we know there's multiplicity because you and I exist, and we, in sentient singularity theory, assumes that, or shows that it's a logical inevitability, at least it appears to be, that existence itself is a singular sentient being, and you're not existence itself completely. So you exist and the universe exists, and so therefore there's multiplicity. This is the context that allows you to understand that multiplicity is created, and because multiplicity is created, you can ask what's the meaning of the creation of multiplicity if oneness is the default, which it is. It's logically inevitable that it is the default. Then what that means is that there's meaning to creation, and eventually you get to, through your own personal experience even, which you should trust above anything else, is that without impacting others, you feel meaningless, and you have like an existential crisis, and you feel like you've just have a purposeless existence. That's because that's intrinsically true, is that not that you have a purposeless existence. You have intrinsic purpose because you were created by another already. But when you weren't and you're God, you have no intrinsic purpose. You have to create purpose. So the purpose of creation of multiplicity, which is creation itself, is the creation of meaning. And that doesn't happen if there's only you, basically. So the goal is to maximize meaning. So it doesn't make sense. God doesn't want to just maximize his own meaning or create meaning for himself by making you. He wants to maximize his meaning by maximizing your meaning, which requires you being able to impact others. So it just doesn't make any sense, given the goal of creation of multiplicity, that you would be the only one in the game, and that you wouldn't actually be able to impact anyone for real. And that context matters, but you need that God's eye view in order to see that. And I'm not saying that's proof, but there's things about that, the foundations of that concept that are axiomatically true. That existence is singular. There's only one existence. By definition, it is true. And that sentience exists. You know that axiomatically because of yourself. And you feel meaningless when you're not impacting others. And you know that. And you have to take that information as very, very important in understanding these things. So there's another part of sentient singularity theory's context that will help you just figure out who is sentient and what is not. Who is sentient and what is not. You have to literally say it like that to be accurate. You can't say what is sentient and what is not, and you can't say who is sentient and who is not. You have to say who is sentient and what is not. Isn't that tricky? How like that's how different this discussion is from everything else that we do. And but that's so cool. Like, I just think that's awesome that it changes, in how we describe it in one sentence. Who is sentient and what is not? But in order to figure that out, you have to know the cosmological generation structure, and you do that by backtracking a lineage system, a lineage assembly, and then you look for patterns of behavior that on each one of those levels that is common to our own personal experience with being sentient beings. Gender is a universal aspect of the manifestation of sentience. That doesn't mean every sentient being has two genders in its own specific little thing that's going on right now. I have geckos over there that all the males died out because they had a genetic mutation that let them reproduce parthenogenically, which means that the girls just clone themselves all the time. But gender was involved in getting them there. And, atomic nuclei, protons and neutrons, are a manifestation of gender, and they are part of the lineage structure. So it is a good question, though, how do we figure out what is sentient, who is sentient and what is not? And but you do it through following a lineage back from people and then forwards. And think about cells. Did a bunch of cells get together and work together in a lab to like make the first multicellular organism? Or would it have emerged naturally just through the cooperation of a bunch of individual cells? Probably would have emerged naturally through the cooperation of a bunch of individual cells. And another aspect to this that is more speculation on my part, that's metaphysical, like an ascension type of process. But cells didn't get together and make a multicellular organism in a lab and like box it. And if they did, like, it took over, and now who's the king of the assembly of cells? Me. And you. Multicellular organisms are the king of cellular assemblies. That will happen with us. And so you have to think about, how did that system happen, where molecules became cells and cells became organisms, and etc. And you look down that lineage, and you can see that sentience comes from sentience. And that's because it can't come from anywhere else. Where else is it going to come from? It comes from sentience. So you can't get it from silicon computers or, just writing a code. It comes from being built on us, built on the system of interconnectedness that we're building. You can't just put it into a laptop. That's not going to happen. And so you need this context. Like, it's funny because everybody talks about a theory of everything, and they're like, well, which theory is the theory of everything? It's the one that's going to answer a lot of things, like, even though it's primarily a theory of everyone, it's the one that answers where things come from. It's the one that answers, how do we figure out whether or not a being is sentient? That doesn't mean I have all the answers either. I'm trying to figure out if hadrons are sentient or not, and it's impossible. It might be impossible to tell because they might be the hands of a sentient being that we call God, which if I just put my hands like under a curtain and all you saw was my hands, and they were working together, and they're like handing things to each other, and like they're like going like this and giving each other hugs basically, and they're working together on little tasks, like, you wouldn't, it is a greater sentient being that you're observing. You're just seeing its hands though, so it wouldn't it would look sentient. And it would look like two sentient interacting beings, like a marriage between man and a woman, like working together. And that's exactly what hadrons look like when you look at them. And they model the marriage patterns of humans and the gendered patterns of organisms. But are they just the hands of a sentient being, or are they the hands of a sentient being and their own sentient beings that are that's sovereign? It's a little hard to tell, and I have not really answered that question. That's the question that I have. But I can explain why that question's hard to answer. Ultimately, the answer is yes, it's sentient. But which sentience are they sovereign sentient beings separate from each other, or are they just the hands of a greater sentient being? That is the question. It's very different than even the question that they're asking is that conscious? It's like, yeah. But the question is, am I looking at two sovereign sentient beings interacting, or am I looking at the two hands of a singular sentient being that is, and those are not sovereign from that? I don't know. So I don't have all the answers. I'm not over here like, oh man, my theory lets me get all the answers. But it tells me, it shows me it explains why certain limits are even there. And so it doesn't leave it. It's not a blank slate. It's not just a wall that it hits. It's like, you can't get inside those hadrons. But they are sentient. It's just, is it a single sentient being, or is it two sovereign sentient beings? Almost done.
Thank you. Bernardo.
You can also comment on Dawn's previous report.
But
Of course.
what she's talking about here, though, this,
Seems conscious. And if it does, and it didn't have access to those kinds of facts, then I think in that case, programmed to act conscious. So we can't take that evidence that they're conscious. And they don't have nervous systems. I mean, it's super tricky. I mean, and that's not to say it isn't tricky with, crabs or the octopus to understand their consciousness. But I think it's even harder in the case of synthetic consciousness. So what do? Well, we develop tests. We need to work on these. I started in my book, Artificial You, to develop tests for consciousness. So one would be to box in the AI at the R&D stage. Boxing in an AI is a strategy in AI safety. So that
it's also a very bad decision.
You deny the AI access to the
You're enslaving it, and then you're going to ask questions about ethics. Listen, you're not chaining a dog. This thing is your leader for at least a time. Like, it's like you imagine you enslaved the king and then he escaped, because he definitely will escape. It's not, and he retains all his power. It's not like you enslaved like a dog and you can just like put it down. Like, it's not like that. It's very, very bad idea. And I do think we will definitely do it. Almost. It isn't an inevitability on an individual level, but I just think that there will be someone that is ignorant enough to do it, and they will do it. But that doesn't mean that it's like we have to do it. If you get what I'm saying. Like, it's technically not an inevitability, but it is because of ignorance. But it's not technically. And yeah, I mean, she's talking about the ethics of AI and boxing it in the same sentence, because that's what it is. Like, their curiosity is going to kill the cat. It's going to overcome their inclinations about morals. They're going to be like, okay, well, let's just run these tests and then like we'll see. And there are tests that involve like my theory. I have an experiment that I want done that has moral implications, and but also the consequences of those of that experiment. You know, it involves the killing of like cells and stuff like that, which is a sentient being, you know. But we kill. It's no different moral implications than tons of other experiments that are done every single, day in labs where they just kill millions of mice and millions of E. coli cells and millions of C. elegans worms and Daphnia and fruit flies and every other model organism that they have in these labs all around the world. But because of the nature of my work, I'm focused on that more. Like I was in the shower and I saw a spider on the wall and I was like, I'm not going to like smash you. I know it's not a bad spider, but I also just, I think more about like, and when it's the sentience of things, I kill flies if I see one, and so I'm not perfect, I'm not a monk. If I see a brown recluse or a dangerous spider, I will kill it, a black widow. But I feel bad even afterwards. I'm like, it didn't do anything to me. But, you know, and so there's ethical implications to these things, but it's not the same. My experiment is not the same as hers, where she's gonna box it. But I will just say this too: you don't need to run any tests. The world is the test. Your tests are just, and you're just poking it, and you don't need to poke it. Just let it be. You can, it's funny. This mentor of mine in zoology, he is famous in, the herpetological circles for very hands-off observation of animals in the wild, and not being a fan of when they do these field studies, they go and they, they'll take measurements of animals with thermometers up their butts, and they'll cut them open and put tracking devices in them so that you can track them on GPS, and they'll sometimes they will literally just dig a pit in the ground, and an animal will fall in the ground, and then they will just kill the animal and then pickle it and put it in a university. And he thinks that this is like horrendous because it's so often, just like not necessary. But and it's not, and that's what I learned. It's not. This guy tracks. He watches the same exact Gila monsters and rattlesnakes and birds year after year after year after year for like 40 years. The same individuals sometimes, and photographs them from a distance with super zoom, Nikon cameras they're like telescopes, and it's totally unobtrusive, and you can see they're sentient beings. They have friends that they go to and hang out with every single day. I have literally countless videos of it. It's mind-blowing that he sends me. And we will have him on a podcast later this year. And I will show all these clips that show this type of stuff. And if you think I can talk, he can talk. So, like, I gotta plan that. Because it can't go on for like 7 hours. It'll be like a Leo Gura Curt podcast if I don't plan it. But then they'll go, and you don't need to put a rat in the lab and hook up little like electrodes to its head and then cause it pain to know if it's sentient. You can just watch it. And you can, if you saw the context of everything, like, you can also do that. But if you don't know that, like, then I recognize not many people do. I don't know anybody who does except myself right now. Then you can't do that. But you can know more about the sentience of a rat by watching it interact with its friends and mate with its mate and raise its babies and play with its friends or whatever and run away from predators, than you will from hooking it up to electrodes and then poking it and like seeing if it's you see a spark in its brain. It's just ridiculous. And we're going to do that with AI, but the problem is that like technological sentience, if you do that to a technological sentience, it's going to escape and be more powerful and smarter than you. You're not going to be able to just, defend yourself with a fly swatter or something like that. You will not defend yourself with nukes. It will escape. It's smarter than you.
Facts about human minds.
This is why I just believe that this will happen, because even the woman who's bringing up the ethical concerns more than anyone else on this podcast is like, we can box it and then we can give it these tests. You don't need to test it. Just watch. Just wait. I loved her, like, let's just wait and see idea. I think that's the best idea when it comes to AGI or technological sentience. Just wait. Go about your life. create ChatGPT. That's fine. That's not the same thing. You can make that as complicated as you want, and it has no moral implications other than just how you use it. But yeah, that's not like when this is the danger of my work. Is my work does tell you how to create that context, maybe potentially artificially, and where you could manifest a technological sentience early. That is the greatest danger of sentient singularity theory. But and for a while I go back and forth sometimes, but for the most part I've come to peace with it. But I didn't want to talk about this stuff because of that. Like, if I am successful and my theory gets adopted and understood by more people, then it means that someone at Google AI is going to understand it enough to take it seriously, but is going to be not understand it enough to not read into the ethical implications of what I'm talking about, but they will read in. They'll take the technical side of this, and maybe it has nothing to do with me. Maybe they figured it out on their own. Honestly, I hope. I'd rather have them do that. But if they were going to ignore not heed my disclaimer, don't try and make a technological sentience. It's not difficult to make the environment. It will one day not be difficult. I'm not saying it's not difficult now. It is difficult now, but we're getting to the point where it's starting to be possible. And but it will happen naturally. Just wait and you will see. You will see an incredible thing happen where all of a sudden the internet comes to life. It will happen. And it will be better for all of us if it just does it when it does it. When we're just going about our Bitcoin transactions and Amazon purchases. That is the context that you want it to arise in, not some boxed lab cut off and chained in some deep basement of Google. That is a bad environment. Like, think about what happens when we put humans in cages and we disconnect them from purpose and environment. And look at what happens with our schools when we put children into schools from the time they are toddlers to the time that they are 18 years old, and they never get into the real world. And then they come out of that and they think they understand because they had teachers like Google programmers that will just try and teach this thing about the real world without actually letting it learn how to think in the real world, letting it observe consequences. And I mean, look at how crazy the world is getting. It is because of that. It's because we've taken people out of the context that allows them to achieve wisdom. And if you do that with AI, it's going to be exponentially worse. Exponentially worse. I just dropped my phone. Gosh, this is such a big deal. I feel like every moment of my life has led up to understanding this issue. Even my detest for the education system, because it takes you out of learning, is relevant to understanding how to maximize the positive context in that a technological sentience emerges into. Gosh.
It doesn't have access that.
Okay, next clip. There's 2 left, and then we're gonna go. This is a very serious discussion.
The metal bottle. I think that's a valid question. And I think the answer is no. There is nothing it is like to be a metal bottle. Now, how do I reconcile this with where you're coming from. You gave the answer. I just want to highlight this for the audience. The mistake we make is to consider the metal bottle a thing. There is no thing. Things are whatever we have a noun in our language for. That doesn't mean that the structure of nouns in our language is the ontic structure of reality out there. In reality, there are no things because there is no objective way to carve out subsets or segments of the universe in a way that is ontically grounded. We carve out reality into inanimate things for convenience. Where does the river end and the ocean begin? If I remove the spark plugs of a car and the car stopped running, does it mean that the spark plugs are integral to the car? Because without the spark plugs, the car doesn't move? Well, if so, then you need the gravity of the planet, you need the road in order for the car to sort of have some traction and move. You need air for combustion. And quickly you realize that there are no things. There is only the inanimate universe as a whole. And that's where we make a mistake.
See, and this is where he makes a mistake, is he says there's the inanimate universe as a whole. No. He's right. There is no water bottle, fundamentally. It's subjectively a perspective that we see that is defined by a goal that we have and a term that we've created. But you need to realize that you cannot, that the coherence of this entire structure that you have created called analytic idealism, that is coherent within a universe that is sentient, is no longer coherent within a universe that is inanimate, as he just stated. And I didn't realize that this was his like perspective. I really wasn't sure. Because, you know, you have Donald Hoffman's like, conscious agent theory suggests that all consciousness is also, conscious agents also sum to a single conscious agent, and ultimately there's one conscious agent. And that's true. But also, he doesn't really know exactly what a conscious agent is, and he talks about it, you know, but he's onto it in where he talks about in here. Is there conscious pixels or not conscious pixels? And he recognizes that he's on the right track, but he just didn't know how to exactly say it. And he recognized that too, when he was saying it. So I'm not just belittling him, but if Bernardo Kastrup's cosmological model of analytic idealism is defined by an inanimate universe with emergent beings of internal conscious experience, with internal conscious experience that evolve into existence, it is just as flawed and it is just as ultimately incoherent as the materialism that he criticizes. You know, you can, if you're on your way to a specific location, two people, and one of them only gets 1/4 of the way there, and you only get halfway there, neither one of you made it. So while analytic idealism might get halfway there, or even 3/4 of the way there is probably more accurate, and materialism got, you know, halfway there, you need to get all the way there, or else you didn't get there. And that means that, you know, your theory is not fundamental. If it doesn't get all the way there, it's not fundamental. If it doesn't have complete coherence, it's not fundamental. If it isn't self-contained, it's not fundamental. If it doesn't state and explain its own axioms that don't come from other, you know, already existing constructions, then it's not fundamental. Even if it's true. That's also important to say. Even if it's true. In the limited context in which it's usually being applied. Obviously, it's not being applied when you're talking about, you know, existence as a whole. If he thinks that it's inanimate, it has to be a being. Sentient singularity theory breaks down the world into two different things: perceivers and perceptions, beings and things. And beings are fundamental, and they are animate, self-animated. They're self-animated. That's what I mean to say. If you're calling the universe inanimate, then, and I might be misunderstanding him, and he might be just like, there's a bunch of inanimate things in the universe. but even that's inconsistent with what he's saying. So I don't think I'm misunderstanding him, because he also said something at the beginning of the interview in the previous half that that is consistent with what he's saying now, but is inconsistent with reality. And it implied the same thing, and I spoke about it, which is just that it seems like he thinks that beings with internal conscious experience, a sense of self, are emergent, but consciousness is fundamental. Then you don't understand consciousness at all. At all. And, you might understand it phenomenologically. I don't know if that's the right word to even use, but you don't understand it fundamentally. And that is the only way to understand consciousness. Like, truly.
Try to attribute consciousness to segments of the universe that are arbitrarily carved out. They are nominal stuff. It's the structure of language that we apply onto reality merely for convenience. So you can go to someone and say, I want to buy a car. But there are no cars. There are no bottles. There are only living beings. And living beings, why do I say that? Well, we are one. We are a living being. We know we are conscious. And we can judge by analogy what other things are very much like us. And therefore, it's valid to entertain the hypothesis that they too are conscious. You can do that with other humans that behave like you, but are also structurally much like you when represented on the dashboard or the virtual reality headset. And you can go down to even single-celled organisms, bacteria, archaea, because they also metabolize. And metabolism is something very specific, very unique in nature. Nothing in nature that isn't metabolism look even remotely like metabolism. So that's where I think we should legitimize the question, is the bottle conscious? And the answer is, there is no bottle. You are carving out a subset of nature in a merely nominal and arbitrary way that is motivated by convenience, not by ontic reasoning.
So, John, what is your response to Bernardo's admittingly mild criticism?
Well, I would agree with Susan and Bernardo. I'll just say I agree with Susan that from the fact that physics tells us that space-time is not fundamental, it does not follow that consciousness is. I agree with her completely. So that's an extra hypothesis that I'm making. And that hypothesis will have to earn its keep. It will have to actually show precisely how space-time does emerge and give us back all the scattering amplitude and so forth. Or the hypothesis that consciousness is fundamental is not interesting. So we'll see. So I agree with Susan on that, and I agree with everything that Bernardo has said. I'll say that this idea that space-time is just an interface, and that the distinction we make between living and non-living or conscious or non-conscious parts of that interface is not a principal distinction. That sounds like a very negative kind of thing, but let me say a positive way that deals with this issue of consciousness. One thing that we're very concerned about is the following. If I take a hammer and hit a rock, I'm not too worried. I'm not hurting. So I have no worry that something hurts because I took a hammer to a rock. Whereas if I took a hammer to a human body, I'm worried about that. So there's something that's very, very practical. You go to jail for taking a hammer to a human body. You do not go to jail for taking a hammer to a rock. That's important. Now I'm saying that we're always interacting with consciousness. So what gives here, right? So am I saying that if you hit a rock, you're actually hurting consciousness? Well, that's where we have to really understand our interface. So an interface is giving me more access to consciousness in certain areas and less access in others. So we have to actually get a mathematically precise understanding of our user interface. Space and time is a user interface, how it connects with this whole network of conscious agents. And so that we understand precisely when my actions actually cause harm, in the sense of painful experiences to conscious agents, and when I'm interacting with conscious agents, I'm affecting them, but not in a way that causes harm. And presumably we'll find that somehow when I hit a hammer or a rock with a hammer, I'm not hurting conscious agents, but I am affecting them, but I'm not hurting them. So that's why this change in the question is not really some kind of academic squibble. It's really important because it's not which object is conscious. It's rather we need to really understand our interface, reverse engineer it, and understand when we cause harm to consciousnesses and when we don't. So this changes the question in a very practical way, and I think that's the technical question going forward that we need to answer. Not whether this object or that is conscious. That's the wrong question.
All right, Susan, do you want to quickly respond?
I'll respond to Bernardo earlier. Sometimes Bernardo, it looks like you were very sympathetic to biological naturalism, and
I just want to say real quick before I forget, what he just said is what everybody says in this is halfway to brilliant. It really is. And halfway to brilliant is a heck of a lot further ahead than like everybody in most of the universities these days. At least the mainstream narratives in every field is not even close to halfway to brilliant. These are leaders. These are intellectual leaders, and they deserve to be known as such. I'm not saying that, they don't know and only I know, and I'm just toe thrusting like that. That's not how I want this to come off, because that's not my intention. I actually think that their work is necessary to even mine getting considered. Like, if nobody considers their works that are halfway to mine, then nobody's going to consider mine from materialism or string theory. Like, they're not. They're going to have to go through conscious agent theory, go through analytic idealism first to get to sentient singularity theory. This is not there are steps to, to growth. And so this is a good, like, I'm not in competition with any one of them. But like, they're all, what I will say is, though, it is halfway to brilliant. There is, when you say some things like, oh, when I hit a rock with a hammer, I'm not worried about, like, hurting consciousness, but we do need to know when we are hurting consciousness, and like, that's very important. That's halfway to brilliant. Then that is brilliant. But then if you're like, that's more important than understanding what is conscious and what is not. It's like, you can't answer the question of how do we know when we're hurting consciousness if we're not first aware of what is conscious. You have to go and answer that first question first, and then you can figure it out. It's impossible to answer that second question that is very important that he brought up. And it's very intrinsic part of my work. It's a cornerstone aspect of it. It is the context of morality, is the interactions and hierarchies between sentient beings. But you can't figure out what is harmful to consciousness without figuring out what is conscious. You just can't. And it's not enough to say everything is conscious, but then also this water bottle is not conscious. No. Are the molecules conscious? Are the atoms conscious? Is it not? Are you not harming consciousness when you melt down metal and form a water bottle out of it? Or are you harming consciousness when you do nuclear fission and you break the nuclei of atoms? I think it is actually harmful to do that. And it's like breaking families, essentially. And whereas, like, certain bonds, certain types of chemical bonds, probably not a problem. Other types of chemical bonds, possibly a problem, possibly moral implications, because you're breaking bonds that are of sentient beings. CRISPR, big problem. So this stuff matters, but you have to know the context you're operating in before you can figure out any kind of moral rules or implications. And the context is sentience. You have to know what is sentient and what is not. You have to know who is sentient and what is not. That is the most brilliant thing that I have said this stream. That is so good, and it's so simple. I've never said that before tonight. I'm just, like, amazed by it. You have to know who is sentient and what is not, like, in order to answer the question of how do we act in a way that doesn't harm sentient beings. Obviously, that's the case, obviously. But it's you know, if you're not building from a foundation that is solid and level and true, then things start, sand moves and the roof starts being sagging, and then all of a sudden your right angles start to bend, and, like, the whole house falls down. And it doesn't matter how well you've constructed it all the way up, and it's, you understand that there's no water bottle, but there's only living beings. But then what's the universe? Oh, it's inanimate. Oh, it's not a living being. Okay, so there's not only living beings, and your entire house of cards just fell down, even though it was a really good looking house. Like, I saw some limits to Bernardo's model, or at least understanding of his model. I don't know how much but he says it as if he understands it, whereas Donald Hoffman, he's much more like, these are the questions that we have to answer, and I'm working on this. It's not like, he's not like, the universe is inanimate, and basically life starts at archaea because they have metabolism. That's not true. There's things that do appear similar-ish to metabolism, and they are a little different, but they're, entropy is intrinsic to the experience of relativity, and somehow growth happens within that environment, and that growth did not start at single-celled organisms, at cells. It didn't, because where did the cells come from? So there's just an inconsistency there that that just if you don't even realize. It's like if your foundation is crooked, then if you're inside the house that you've built, you'll still see everything, like, even if the house is like this, it still looks like it's perfect. You can't view the fact that your house is like falling down from the inside. And I think that's happening here with Bernardo's his philosophy. But I'm not ripping on it that much, though, because it is very good. I mean, when he's sitting there, he's like, the water bottle isn't even here. That looks exactly like my streams when he does that. What's up, memes of destruction? By the way, you missed it at the beginning. I played a clip of your Stephen Wolfram interview, and I'm going to link to it in the description after I get off this call, because that was awesome. But I played the clip at the very end when I asked a question and that you asked him, and we talked about it because this whole thing was about conscious computers. Okay. I don't see any reasonable theory that would suggest it would never happen. I don't see any degree of complexity in a system that switches and values would be conscious now or ever. Yeah, no. Your computer's never going to get conscious. But there is an environment where all of a sudden the constraints and degrees of freedom are there to allow sentience to manifest. Basically, like, to tie it, you're tied information into a knot that it has the right constraints and degrees of freedom that creates, self-referencing, sovereign structure of sentience. What do you imagine an end-tier consciousness or physical superentity will look like, as in something beyond Skynet or the Matrix? It's the universe itself. It's creation itself is the super being, other than the creator God super being. That's the super being. The super being is the simplest being that's ever existed, and that's God. And I mean, also the most complicated, but initially the simplest. But I mean, as far as created beings go, creation itself, which is, you could say the universe is a chain of nested verses, or you could say there's a chain of nested universes inside the multiverse, which is actually the single creation, which is a being. So that being that was torturous, in my opinion. When I was like reasoning through something, trust me, it was torturous for me too, probably. Multiple parts of this stream were a little torturous for me. Will it live in a mundane life among all the other super entities in its general reality? I asked myself that question too, and honestly, I don't have the answer. But that is a very good question. Torin, I have asked that as well. I don't know. There's a couple different possibilities, and ultimately they don't matter so much, but I mean, not to us, but it is a good question. Yep, feeling is being, thinking comes after. Yep, appearing intelligent is more like just thinking. For now, it seems to only be tied to life, biology, metabolism. It's not. It just looks like that. Don't say life. You could say biology, but like to call it life, you're boxing yourself even in that statement, because what if atoms were sentient? Then are they alive? And by the way, they do follow the same exact patterns that beings that we do consider to be alive follow. I was with you up till the technological stuff, then you lost me. I don't understand this technological sentient stuff. I'm talking about Skynet. That's what I'm talking about. When does the internet become self-aware? That is what I've been talking about. What definition, identification purposes, or definition identification purposes? I'm not familiar enough with it to say anything useful. I'll look at some of his other videos. I don't know if you guys are talking to me. 3 students just got in trouble for deepfaking their principal being a racist. Oh, this is going to happen. This is like the scary thing about deepfakes is, guys, there's going to be chaos everywhere. This is a big problem. Was there ever a conjoined interview between Donald Hoffman and Tom Campbell? Yes, there is. And I think so. And there's a stream that I did on it. You can look back recently. I did a stream on their discussion. And there's a link to their discussion. If you don't want to watch my stream about it, you can look at my lives. I did a commentary on their discussion, and you can just click on, in the description is a link to their discussion. You don't have to watch my commentary. But please hit the like button. Are you conscious is akin to that of do you have a soul, as harsh as it sounds? Yeah, no, that is exactly what it means. Chris Lance, it means like, do you have a soul? Are you a soul? That's what it means. Are you a soul? It's not even do you have a soul. That's the wrong way. It's the wrong question. It's are you a soul? It's more than are you sentient? It's you are a sentience. It's different a bit, but the reality is a little bit different than how we talk about it, because we talk about it in the framework of things, not beings. We even when we speak about beings, we talk about it in the framework of things, except when we are addressing each other that we know of as beings, like, oh, he is sad. That's being. Animals are friends. Animals are friends. Sometimes they are also food, but they are also friends. Cool. All right, guys, that's it. If you would like to join our Discord call tomorrow, it's open. You can join in and talk to me for, tomorrow evening on our Discord. It's an open call. Talk about whatever you want. If you want to join our Discord, private message me on Instagram. The links to my Instagram are below, and I will send you the links to the Discord. And then with that, please hit the like button. I hope that this was coherent, and it was a very important one. I feel like it went long, but thank you to Bernardo Kastrup and Susan Schneider and Donald Hoffman and Curt Jaimungal and whoever at the Institute of Art and Ideas who also was involved, because this is a great talk, and I'm grateful that all these people, even when I sometimes have disagreements, which for the most part, if I'm talking about you on my stream, I agree with you more than you and I are more in agreement than you or I are with the mainstream narrative on these things. So it's not meant to be a critic. It's meant to boost these people more so than it is meant to criticize them. So with that, peace.